Welcome back to Terrified Tales, where the rain falls slow and the fear creeps in quicker. Like and subscribe before we begin, and tell us where and when you're listening. Midnight, alone, that's when they find you. The train sliced through valleys steeped in fog, tracing the edge of a land Marla Evsend had spent a lifetime trying to forget. Beyond the window pane, frost clung to ferns and skeletal trees with an early cruelty. It was barely October, but the land here always turned cold before it ought to, like it anticipated her. She didn't speak as the conductor called her stop, Diffnant Hollow, a name that thudded against her skull like a sealed cellar door. She stepped off with her suitcase in one hand and a cloth pouch in the other, containing exactly three things: a recorder, a faded map of her grandmother's estate, and the glass larynx pendant, its fragile chain tangled with dried leaves. The pendant was no bigger than a thumb, the color of candlelight through dust. A crack spidered through its base, making it hum ever so faintly when the wind touched it. The platform was empty. No cabs, no welcome. Only a hand-carved sign nailed to a tilting post. Wither Orchard, 2 miles north, half erased by mildew. Marla walked. Gravel shifted beneath her boots as she moved deeper into Diffnant's wet green silence. Her breath fogged the air. Above her, the forest thinned into haggard branches. Below, the earth was soft, too soft, like the land was still digesting something. Wither Orchard emerged from the tree line like a wound, a sprawling manor of blackened brick and lichen-swallowed gables. Broken gutters sagged like snapped necks. The windows had gone blind with rot, and behind it, nestled in fog, the orchard slouched on a slope. Dozens of unnatural trees, with smooth, transparent trunks like blown glass, grown from the ground. As she neared the front door, she felt it again, the vibration. The pendant pressed against her chest hummed with a strange warmth. She reached up and closed her fingers around it, but the sensation deepened, like a low note struck inside her ribs. The manor door opened before she knocked. A man stood in its frame, tall, wiry, and hunched forward as if the house itself were, draped over his shoulders. His face was a patchwork of old burns, the skin over one cheek drawn tight like paper. "You're early," he said. Marla opened her mouth, but nothing came. The words existed. She could feel them rise like birds startled from a field. But her throat stayed sealed. "Ah," the man said. "You really don't talk anymore." She shook her head. "I'm Elias Rowan, groundskeeper. Been looking after the place since your nan passed." He stepped aside to let her in. "They told me you were coming to archive what's left. I didn't think you'd really come back." She crossed the threshold and paused. The manor greeted her like a mausoleum. Everything smelled of damp, earth and iron, the furniture sagging beneath dust, and mirrors shrouded in yellowed sheets. Her suitcase clicked softly on the cracked marble floor. Elias cleared his throat. "I made up your room, same one as before, if that's all right." She nodded. He gave a strange half-smile and tilted his head toward the orchard. "You seen it yet?" Marla followed his gaze to the back windows. The glass trees shimmered beneath, the dying light, trunks transparent as thawed ice, with branches so fine they looked like spider webs spun from quartz. "What's left of them?" Elias muttered. "Most died years ago, but a few still whisper." She turned to him sharply. He held up his hands. Figure of speech. Course, trees don't talk. But as he turned and walked away, she could swear she heard it again. Not from him, not from herself, but from the pendant, a voice, low, muffled, a memory nearly drowned. "Marla, you promised not to leave me." She clutched the pendant until her palm ached. Upstairs, her old room waited untouched. The wallpaper had peeled into curls. A A cracked mirror leaned against the dresser, still draped, and on the windowsill, pressed, between dusty glass panes, lay the only sign of recent life. A single black feather and a small polished stone, clear as crystal, faintly red at the core. She set her suitcase down and moved to the bed. When she sat, the mattress exhaled the smell of old smoke. From her coat pocket, she drew out her tape recorder. She clicked it on, placed it on the nightstand, and pressed record. She never spoke, but this part, this ritual, remained. Day 1. Wither Orchard. The manor is intact, grounds overgrown, chimes audible in the orchard despite no wind, pendant active, memory resonance possible, no verbal response, no sign of Maeve. She clicked it off. Downstairs, the chimes began to ring, gently, repetitively. They had no melody. They sounded like teeth tapping glass. She stood and moved to the window. From the trees below, a gust of wind passed, and with it, a sudden noise, like something dragging nails across a mirror. She flinched and bit down on her lip. The orchard had turned, every branch now bent ever so slightly toward the manor, toward her. The cracked pendant buzzed like a wasp trapped in her throat. The morning came reluctantly. Grey light filtered through warped window panes as though struggling to remember its own colour. Marla stirred at the edge of the narrow bed, not from sleep. She hadn't managed more than an hour of that, but from the low, bone-dry clicking that continued through dawn like an obsessive watch trying to rewind itself. She dressed silently, thick wool sweater, her grandmother's corduroy coat, cracked leather boots. Before descending the stairs, she opened the nightstand drawer and ran her fingers over the recorder, pausing. Then she clicked it on. Day 2. Orchard wind active at dawn. Glass trees responsive overnight. Initial auditory activity sustained. Subject remained mute. Symbolic artifact, pendant, continues to vibrate intermittently. Emotional interference increasing. Prepare for orchard entry. She clicked it off, tucked the recorder into her pocket beside the map. The pendant lay just beneath her collarbone, warm against her chest. Downstairs, Elias was waiting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee, one steaming, the other untouched. A weathered thermos sat beside him, likely filled from the same iron kettle steaming on the stove. He was whittling something from a knuckle-thick branch. The shavings formed a spiral at his feet. "Didn't sleep," he said without looking up. "Most don't first night back." Marla sat across from him, wrapping her hands around the mug. She didn't drink. "They whisper more in October," he continued, eyes flicking up to her. "Always have. Cold makes them louder. Cold and..." The wrong kind of silence. She cocked her head. "Silence," he repeated. "Not peace. Not stillness. Silence. This place doesn't like it. Makes it hungry." She scribbled quickly in the margin of her map. Hollow reacts to forced silence. Elias aware of auditory sensitivity in grounds. May imply entity fed by repression. He caught her glance and gestured to the open door that led toward the garden. "You want to see 'em, don't you?" he asked. "The trees." She nodded. Elias rose and pulled a thick keyring from the wall, selecting a single iron key so rusted it looked like it bled. "Best go while there's light." They stepped into the open air. The wind bit, but did not move the trees. Even the orchard fog seemed static, coiled like breath that refused to exhale. The soil along the path was soft and deeply gouged with footprints that had not faded. Marla stopped at the gate to the orchard. Beyond it, the trees stood tall and silent, each one impossibly clear, like a frozen organ pipe. Their trunks were smooth and subtly coiled, as if grown in a slow, spiraling tension. Some bore faint colors, stains like bruises or old ink suspended in glass. Others reflected nothing at all. A slow ting sounded above them. She looked up. Tiny glass wind chimes hung from the branches, not tied with string but embedded, grown directly into the branches like unnatural fruit. They clicked gently against one another, seemingly with no wind at all. "You know what they say about these trees," Elias muttered. Marla shook her head. "They say they grow from the throats of the silenced. You bury the voice. The roots twist around it, feed on what's unsaid." He tapped his temple. "Nonsense, of course." She stared at one particularly tall tree. Its surface was uneven, slightly bulbous around the middle, and flecked with hairline cracks that reminded her uncomfortably of the pendant against her chest. A branch overhead creaked, slow and sorrowful. "Not many left now," Elias said. "Used to be a full grove. After the fire, most of them cracked from the inside, like the sound had been screaming to get out. They passed a central tree, taller than the rest. Unlike its siblings, its bark wasn't smooth. It was etched, with what looked like letters, some reversed, some buried beneath other names." Marla stopped cold. Near the middle, carved in a clumsy, looping scrawl, were 2 letters. M-E. She swallowed hard. A dull pressure swelled behind her ears. Her own initials, or Maeve's, or both. Elias noticed her pause. "Could be yours," he said. "Could be your sister's. Trees don't tell." Marla pulled out her recorder with trembling fingers and pressed record, eyes locked on the scarred glass. Initials located on oldest trunk. Central formation, likely ritual locus. Engraving. Consistent with child's hand. Symbolic convergence with pendant noted. She stopped the recording and turned back toward the house, but not before she caught something in the corner of her eye. One of the smaller trees breathed. The glass expanded ever so slightly, then contracted. 2. Slowly for natural movement. Too rhythmically to be coincidence. Elias followed her gaze. "They do that," he said too casually. "Especially when someone new comes. They remember." Marla scribbled a final note. "Trees display autonomic respiration mimicry. Possible sensory response to proximity or memory." They returned to the house in silence. At the door, Elias paused. "You should know," he said. "No one buried your sister, not properly." Marla froze. They never found her throat, just the rest. She didn't respond. She couldn't. The pendant hummed like a dying bird. Elias pushed open the door. "Best stay in tonight. The orchard's still listening." Inside, Marla climbed to the attic alone. Her breath steamed in the cold stairwell, and each step creaked like a coffin lid being opened slowly. At the top, behind brittle curtains, she pulled open the attic door. It smelled of wax and mold. Dust hung thick as cotton. In the far corner stood a tall wooden trunk, iron-clasped and scorched black across one side. It bore a single item on top, a child's handprint, small, greasy, and recent. Marla approached. When she touched the lid, the glass chimes outside sang once discordantly, like a scream caught in a music box. She opened the trunk. Inside were scorched journals, scraps of hair ribbon, and, wrapped in red silk, a blown glass tongue no longer than a spoon. It shimmered faintly. She reached out. Her fingers brushed its surface, and in that moment, somewhere in the orchard, a branch snapped. The tongue vibrated in her palm, and a sound, a child's voice, high and strained, came from her pendant, not her memory. "Don't take mine. I need it to scream." The attic was heavier after the voice. It wasn't the dust, or the pitch-black crawl spaces, or the peeling wallpaper sagging like skin. It was something subtler, a pressure behind the eyes, a ringing behind silence, as if her name had been spoken somewhere she couldn't hear, and the world was pausing to listen for her answer. But she had no answer. Marla sat cross-legged before the open trunk. The blown glass tongue lay in her lap, wrapped again in its fraying silk. It looked less like an object now and more like a preserved relic, something that had once been alive and had hardened into memory. Every few seconds, it pulsed with a faint orange glow, the exact hue of dying embers. She hadn't meant to hold it for this long. Her fingers ached from clutching it. The attic floor creaked behind her. A draft whispered through the wood slats. She turned. No one. But somewhere far below, perhaps in the cellar or beneath the orchard, she heard it again. Glass knocking against glass, a rhythm without a source. Tick, tick, tock. She blinked hard and pulled out her recorder, hand trembling. Day 2 continued. Retrieved artifact, glass tongue. Possible mnemonic properties. Triggered auditory hallucination. Subject heard child's voice matching known patterns of Maeve Evesend. No external source located. Entity presence unconfirmed. Emotional status compromised. She clicked the device off. The journals in the trunk were blackened at the edges, ink bled into watercolor Rorschachs. She lifted one and flipped through pages of tangled cursive, spiraling sketches of trees with open mouths and phrases repeated again and again. She took mine. Roots in throat, fruit in fire. Speak to be eaten, stay silent to rot. Marla's breathing quickened. At the center of the book was a pressed flower, or what had once been one. Now it was a black, brittle thing, the petals almost crystalline, veins glittering as if threaded with ash. The phrase beneath it, written in childish block letters, I buried her voice where it would grow. Something cracked behind the wall. Marla froze. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't time settling. It was a sharp, wet snap, like a throat being wrenched sideways. She rose back from the trunk and scanned the room. The far wall, partially eaten by mold and time, had begun to bulge outward, just slightly but unmistakably. It pulsed once, like something inside had taken a breath. Marla backed toward the stairs. Her boots scraped the floor. She hadn't even noticed the hairs on her arms standing until the static buzz kissed her spine. She descended to the second floor, quickly gripping the rail. Her foot hit the last step, and the pendant sang. Just one note, like a bell struck underwater. Below, in the front hall, someone knocked. 3 deliberate knocks, then silence. Marla froze behind the banister. Elias wasn't due back until evening. And no one in this town would come to Wither Orchard without cause. Certainly not after what happened. She waited. A breath. 2. Another knock. Slower this time. As if whoever stood outside wanted her to hear the weight behind it. She stepped lightly to the study window and pulled the curtain just an inch aside. There was no one there. No shape. No shadow. Just fog. But the gate to the orchard stood wide. Open. She hadn't opened it. Later, as the sun dipped behind the tree line, Elias returned. Mud up to his shins and an axe slung over his shoulder. He found Marla pacing the front hall, her fingers twitching, the pendant clutched between them. Like a rosary, you look like you seen the Hollow Walk. She didn't speak, but he read the panic in her eyes. Tell me, he said. What did it do? She scribbled quickly on her notepad, knocking at the door. Gate open, voice from pendant, attic wall breathing, tongue speaks. Elias took a step back. His jaw twitched. Jesus, Mary, you found it, didn't you? He whispered. The tongue. She nodded slowly. He turned away from her and dragged a chair out from the dining room, collapsing into it. He ran his hand through his hair, dirt flaking from his scalp like ash. Did it speak to you? She didn't move. He slammed a fist on the table. Did it speak, Marla? The chandelier above them rattled. She wrote. It said, don't take mine. I need it to scream. Elias leaned forward, elbows on knees, and whispered more to himself than her. She was just a girl. Just a little girl. Marla stepped toward him, eyes wide. What they did. It wasn't meant for her, he said, now staring into the distance. like he was seeing something outside the window no one else could. It was meant for you. He looked up at her. You were the quiet one, the one who could keep the silence. That's what the orchard needs. Someone who knows how to bury what they want to say. Marla pointed to the pendant, then the attic. You think the tongue's all there is? He said darkly. They're planted, girl. That's what the orchard is. A graveyard for everything never said, every voice choked down, every scream stopped short. Marla trembled. Her hand went to the pendant again. He nodded at it. You remember who gave that to you? She shook her head. His voice cracked. It wasn't your sister. That's what they told you. But it wasn't. Marla's lips parted slightly. She pulled it from the dirt, he said. Said she found it beneath the oldest tree. It was still warm, like something had just coughed it up. He stood, suddenly furious. You shouldn't be here, he muttered. You shouldn't be here. Marla held up her hand, trembling, pointing toward the orchard through the back window. The chimes had begun again, but this time, the sound was different. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, rhythmic, a pattern. Tap, pause, tap, 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 pause, tap. Marla's eyes widened. Morse code. She sprinted to the study, pulled an old reference book from the shelf, and flipped through the brittle pages until she found the translation chart. She copied the pattern. 3 letters, M-E-A Marla. The trees were calling her name. That night, she couldn't sleep. She paced the halls of Wither Orchard in socked feet, every step muffled by worn rugs and layers of dust. In the sitting room, the fire crackled softly. Elias had lit it and locked himself in his quarters. Outside, the fog pressed against the glass, thick as milk. The orchard beyond was only partially visible, but she could see the trees swaying ever so slightly, even though there was no wind. She turned from the window and saw the silhouette, standing at the end of the hall. Small, barefoot, hair matted. Face hidden by shadow. For a single second, less than that, the world stopped moving. Then the figure turned and vanished down the stairs toward the basement. Marla followed, against everything logical, against her own tightening throat, against the heat behind her eyes, down into the dark. Each step downward felt like a sentence being swallowed. The basement was cold. The light from the attic didn't follow her here. Only the sound of the ticking, that soft, repeated clink of glass. She turned on her flashlight. The beam scanned rusted shelves, broken chairs, and finally settled on the old phonograph in the corner. It was playing. A warped vinyl turned slowly beneath a chipped needle, and from it came her voice. Not as she was now, as she had been years ago. Maeve, stop it. You're scaring me, Maeve. Don't take it. I didn't mean to. Marla dropped the flashlight. It spun wildly across the room. The pendant against her chest flared with a blinding heat. The trees above moaned in unison, and from the speaker, Maeve's voice came clearly, for the first time in over 20 years. You promised not to leave me, but you took my scream, and I'm still inside it. Marla didn't remember how she got back upstairs. One moment, she had been kneeling in the basement, hands pressed to her ears, Maeve's voice still crackling from the phonograph behind her like dying embers, hissing in wax. The next, she was standing in the Manor's study at dawn, the fireplace cold, her coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders, though she didn't recall putting it on. The recorder sat beside a pile of open books. The last thing it had captured was static, and one whispered phrase, repeated 7 times before trailing off. She took it. I heard her take it. I felt it stop. Marla didn't press play again. Outside, the morning fog had thickened to the color of wet ash. The glass orchard beyond the window now swayed openly, limbs ticking gently against one another, mimicking voices in some awful communion. No wind moved them, only intention. She turned as a knock echoed sharply from the front door. 1, 2, 3. Her throat tightened. She approached cautiously, her fingers grazing the edge of a silver letter opener left on the hallway table. Her hand trembled. For a brief moment, she saw her own reflection in the ornate hallway mirror, pale, hollow-eyed, jaw trembling, but it flickered, distorted by something behind the glass. A shadow, a child's outline. Marla turned and flung the door open. Karis. Vale stood on the threshold, hood drawn, cheeks red from the cold, a leather satchel slung across her body. She smiled the way you smile when you see a name on a gravestone that you thought belonged to someone else. Marla, she said too brightly. God, I can't believe it's really you. Marla stepped back to let her in, though she didn't move aside. Karis paused. Still not talking? She asked softly. Marla shook her head once. Karis hesitated, then stepped inside, brushing past her. She took in the house like someone inspecting old bones, touching the walls, sniffing the air, stopping at the tapestries as though they'd whisper memories. She let her satchel fall to a chair. You were supposed to burn this place down, she said finally. Years ago. Marla arched a brow. I mean it, Karis said. Your Nan was terrified you'd come back. That's something. Would wake up if you did. And here you are. Back where it started. Marla moved to the sitting room table and began to write quickly in her journal. She tore out the page and handed it to Karis. Why are you really here? Karis read it. Her face remained unreadable. I was the first person they called when you asked for the archive keys, she said. They knew I studied different folklore, but I think they hoped I'd stop you. She paused. I didn't tell them what I knew. I wanted to see what you'd remember. Marla's pen scratched furiously across the page. What did I forget? Karis didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the back window and stared at the orchard. Do you know what those trees were before they were glass? Marla shook her head slowly. They were orchards of black ash and hornbeam. Twisted, little things. They say the original trees were struck silent in a storm so terrible it froze their leaves mid-scream. She turned back, eyes glassy. And then came the first girl, who couldn't stop screaming. Marla stepped forward, her face a mask of need and panic. Karis sighed and opened her satchel. She pulled out an old leather-bound tome, darker than rust, its pages flared with use. She set it on the table between them. It was labeled in smudged ink. Rituals of the Hollow, Offerings of Throat and Root. Karis flipped it open to a page marked with a brittle red ribbon. The illustration showed a tree with a human throat nestled between its roots, lips parted, tongue missing. Above it, children danced in a ring, mouths sewn shut, while a moon hung low behind them like an eye. Underneath was a handwritten passage. When the blood twins call forth the orchard's womb, one will carry silence, the other sound. Their DC voices feed the branches, and the forgotten one shall flower in glass. Marla's mouth went dry. She touched the pendant at her throat. The crack had deepened since yesterday. Karis met her eyes. You were never supposed to remember, she said. That's how the ritual protects itself. Silence seals it. Marla took a step back, heart pounding. She began to scrawl furiously. What ritual? Why didn't you stop us? Karis hesitated, then looked away. I was there, she said softly. That night. I followed you and Maeve to the orchard. I watched from the hedgerow while you drew circles with crushed ash and bone. You lit the candles. You said the rhyme. She blinked, once, twice, but you didn't say the last line. Maeve did. She finished it for you. Karis looked at her then, guilt warping her voice. She gave you her voice, and something else took her. Marla felt her knees weaken. Karis reached forward, gently grabbing her wrist. The thing that lives in those trees isn't just some spirit, she whispered. It's a memory, a memory that needs hosts to survive. She pointed toward the pendant. That isn't just a symbol. It's a piece of her. Marla tried to breathe, then the chandelier swayed above them, and from the back of the house, the cellar door slammed open. A gust of wet, burnt air rushed up from below. Caris froze. "Did you go down there?" she asked. Marla nodded. "Alone?" "Nod. You heard her, didn't you?" Marla's eyes filled with panic. Caris grabbed the tome and pressed it into her arms. "Then we have to move quickly," she said, "because if she's already speaking again..." The chimes outside shrieked. Not sang, not whispered, shrieked. Every window in the manor shuddered. And then the sound of glass breaking from somewhere inside the orchard. A long, shattering note like the sky had cracked. Marla turned and ran to the back doors. She flung them open. Fog poured into the house like a rising tide. In the distance, among the trees, she saw one of them, one of the oldest, had fractured open, split vertically from root to crown. From its exposed center spilled black liquid. And inside it was something human-shaped, slumped, head bowed, bare feet glistening. Glass embedded along the spine like thorns, and the chimes were repeating her name again. Not in Morse, not in rhyme. Now they simply said, "Marla, Marla, Marla." The pendant throbbed so hard it nearly drew blood from her throat. And behind her, Caris whispered, "It's too late." Marla didn't speak, couldn't speak, but her body was already running. She burst across the lawn with the tome clutched to her chest, coat snapping behind her like smoke. Her boots hit the softened path with wet thuds, the earth slick beneath her soles. The fog made it feel like she was running through breath. Someone else's breath, exhaled slow and cold. Behind her, Caris called something. Maybe her name, maybe a warning. But the sound was swallowed by the orchard's groaning chorus of glass. As she crossed the gate, something shifted. It was slight, almost imperceptible, but Marla felt it. A tension in her bones, a pressure in the air, like crossing the lip of a cathedral built for things older than God. The orchard didn't move, yet the trees seemed closer than they had before. Their trunks gleamed faintly with condensation or something thicker, and the embedded chimes swayed slowly without a breeze. She slowed as she neared the fractured tree. Its trunk had split clean down the center, jagged like torn skin, revealing a dark cavity inside, not empty, but filled with a resinous blood-colored sap. It dripped like molasses, viscous and steaming. A fine mist of glass dust floated near the wound. Something stirred within it. She stepped closer, breath trembling, and then a hand reached out, pale, thin, fingers stained red at the tips. It pressed against the inside of the glass trunk as if trying to push back out of the thing that had swallowed it. And then the head followed, bowed, hair stringy and black, soaked in that same sap. No face visible yet, no eyes, just breath, shallow, shivering and echoing unnaturally through the grove. Marla's knees locked. The pendant at her throat buzzed violently and then, horrifyingly, began to grow warm, warmer than ever before. Like something inside was waking. She reached up, gasping without sound, and yanked it from her neck. It pulsed in her palm. The thing inside the tree stopped moving, and slowly, horribly, it began to hum. A soft, broken lullaby. Off-key. Familiar. The same lullaby Maeve had sung on the night of the fire. The same one Marla had refused to join in on. She remembered it now, the cadence, the awful, stilted pauses between lines, and the way Maeve had looked at her when she wouldn't sing, like she already knew what would be taken from her. The voice coming from the tree wasn't quite human. It was reedy, echoing, like it passed through 1,000 cracks before reaching her. "Hush now, little sister, root your sorrow deep. Give me all your silence, plant it where you sleep." Then, The figure inside the tree screamed. A high, crystalline wail that made every single wind chime detonate into sound, an orchestra of breaking glass that sent Marla staggering backward. The ground vibrated. Leaves, though none should have been there, fell upward. And from the grove, one tree began to shake violently, not the broken one. Another, farther in, older, taller, with bark etched in names. Marla's legs moved. Before her mind caught up, she ran to it. The tree stood nearly 2 stories high. Its glass was clouded and yellowed, as if aged by time. Along the base, embedded in the trunk like pearls trapped in amber, were dozens of small teeth. Children's teeth, some clean, some cracked, all facing outward. Her stomach lurched. Above them, names had been carved, initials mostly. She recognized a few, MECVJE, her own. Caris's, her father's. A scream threatened to burst from her, but it died in her chest. One name stood apart, MAEV. It was not carved. It had been grown into the tree. The glass warped to shape the letters as if it had once wrapped around her spine and learned to spell. Below the name sat a small wooden drawer, almost hidden in the underbrush at the base of the trunk. Moss clung to it like gauze. Marla knelt, heart thudding in her ears, and pulled it open. Inside was a small cloth pouch, identical to the one she had carried the pendant in. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. Inside lay a single molar, blackened and sealed in amber. Next to it, a fragment of red ribbon and a photograph, water-damaged but still clear. 2 girls, holding hands in front of the orchard, one of them smiling, the other, mouth sewn shut with thread. Marla dropped. It fell backward, clutched at her throat, where something seemed to be coiling now, inside her, some deep instinct that begged her to scream. But she couldn't. She hadn't screamed that night either. Not when Maeve begged her to. Not when the fire started, not when the tree called her name. Behind her, the grove whispered again, a voice, but not Maeve's, deeper, hungrier, older. To silence is to sow, to listen is to root, but to forget is to bloom. Marla turned slowly. The sapling behind her had bloomed, not flowers, not fruit, mouths, tiny glass-blown mouths, open and whispering, lips curled in silent moans, teeth sharp as pins, all whispering her name, some in her father's voice, some in Maeve's, some in her own. She backed away, heart punching against her ribs, but her heel struck something. A foot, human. She looked down. There, half buried in the orchard's soft soil, was the body of a child, not rotted, not skeletal, preserved in glass, perfect, frozen, sleepless eyes wide open, and from its mouth a glass branch grew. Just as Marla gasped, Elias grabbed her from behind. He pulled her away from the body, dragging her through the underbrush with surprising force. "Don't look at it," he hissed. "That's not her," Marla kicked, struggled. "It wears her," he growled. "But it's not Maeve." He threw her down behind a fallen log. The orchard trembled. She looked up at him. Elias's face was streaked with sweat and sap. His left arm bore fresh cuts, oozing dark syrup, not blood. "I told you," he panted. "I told you not to come in after dusk." He reached into his coat and pulled out a jagged shard of black glass. Marla backed away. "This is the only thing that can cut the root," he said. "Only thing that can make it forget." He held it out to her. "You have a choice," he said. "Either she remembers what happened, or you do." The pendant around her neck began to hum again, faster, hotter, like it knew she was deciding. She reached out, took the shard, and in the trees above, the wind chimes all went silent. The trees had gone utterly still, not the kind of stillness that comes with sleep or serenity, but the stillness of a held breath, of a predator poised behind a veil. The orchard crouched in suspended awareness as if it too awaited Marla's next move. She clutched the shard of black glass Elias had given her, not obsidian, not onyx, but something older, denser. It vibrated faintly, like a tuning fork struck beneath the earth. Fog coiled between the trees in thick serpentine strands. The light of dusk had turned pale, near blue, and when she stepped back toward the edge of the grove, her boots crunched beneath her with a sound that stopped her heart cold. Frost. The ground, once soft and mossy, had frozen in patchy sheets, a crust of rime now blooming over roots and grass. She crouched, touched it with gloved fingers, and pulled back sharply. Beneath the frost, something pulsed, faint but alive. It beat like a heart. A second later, the tree beside her exhaled. Puff of cold air, sharp with the smell of iron and damp bark, blew past her face. She staggered back, mouth opening in a silent gasp. The frost spread faster. From every direction, trunks and branches now coated themselves in fine white sheen, and the orchard shifted hues, its glass bark turning from transparent to milky and brittle, like the frozen surface of a lake about to crack. As she turned, Marla realized it wasn't the weather at all. It was the orchard responding to her decision. Her fingers tightened around the black shard. Behind her, Elias swore under his breath. "It knows you're holding it," he said. "It's drawing everything inward, wants to make sure you don't use it." Marla looked to him, eyes wide. Elias nodded grimly. "Yeah, the root hears." Then a sound, soft at first, rose from under the soil. Tick, 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 tock. Marla turned, straining to find the source. The ticking wasn't mechanical, it was organic. Like something alive was mimicking a clock using wet bone and hollow bark. Her eyes followed the sound until she reached the base of a nearby tree, its bark still etched with that warped name, Maeve. From beneath its roots, the frost cracked open, like a spiderweb revealing a small vent in the earth pulsing with cold steam. Marla knelt beside it and listened. Voices, dozens, no, hundreds, whispering all at once, layered over each other like wet pages in an unreadable book. Some sobbed, some screamed, some whispered her name in her sister's voice, and one, a dry, papery woman's voice, hissed the phrase, "The harvest returns, and the fruit must answer." She scrambled back. Elias moved between her and the roots, his axe drawn now. "They're waking the buried ones," he muttered. "Every one of them a voice that shouldn't have been taken." Marla scribbled furiously in her journal, now soaked, with mist, frost spreading unnaturally across orchard. Symbolic of preservation or suffocation. Voices below roots. Entity may be drawing silence toward a climax. Glass shard, possibly catalyst or anchor. Elias aware of buried ones. Then another sound, not beneath, above. From high in the trees, a metallic clatter rang out, sharp, quick, violent. Not the usual tinkling of the chimes. She looked up and saw one of them falling, a wind chime, longer than the rest, its pieces shaped like teeth, plummeted from a branch and shattered against the ground, not 3 feet from her boots. The teeth spilled in a perfect semicircle. Inside one of the glass fragments lay a rolled scrap of paper, so tiny it looked like a prayer. She retrieved it with trembling fingers, unfurled it. A drawing, a crude child's sketch of 2 girls standing by a tree. One held a black pendant, the other a branch in her mouth. Their faces were blank. Above them, someone had scrawled a single word in smeared charcoal. "Remember." The frost beneath her knees cracked wider. Something was rising. Elias saw it. "Two." He grabbed her arm and yanked her upright. "We need to go, now." She hesitated, looking back at the open vent, the pulsing frost, the broken chime. But she knew. Some truths weren't uncovered. They rose on their own. As they stumbled back toward the manor, Marla felt it, a pull, gentle but unmistakable, as though her body were tethered to the orchard by a thread of sound. The pendant she'd torn from her neck earlier, now deep in her coat pocket, had begun to pulse again in rhythm with the black shard, and she realized it wasn't just one piece. They were fragments of the same whole. Inside the manor, Caris was waiting, pacing furiously in front of the dead fireplace, clutching an old tape recorder like it was holy. When she saw Marla and Elias return, her expression cracked. "You brought it back, didn't you?" she asked Marla. "The shard?" Marla nodded. Caris's eyes brimmed with panic. "You shouldn't have." She approached, trembling, and lifted the tape recorder. "I thought you needed to hear this," she said. "It's from the ritual night, the real one. Your grandmother recorded it." She pressed play. At first, only static, then faint singing. 2 young voices, Maeve and Marla. One for the root, one for the flame. We switch our voices, switch our names. Then, a scream. Cut short, a scuffle. The sound of something breaking, not glass, but bone. Then Maeve's voice again, barely audible, sobbing. "She said I could have it back." She promised. "I gave it all. Why can't I scream?" Then the tape cut. Marla staggered backward, heart racing. Elias muttered, "She gave it willingly." But it didn't let go. Caris looked haunted. "I told her not to. I begged her not to. But she said if she had your voice, she could finally make them hear her. She didn't know. The orchard takes more than sound." Marla collapsed into a chair. The shard slipped from her fingers onto the table with a dull clink. Her hand shook as she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the pendant. Together, side by side, they looked like 2 puzzle pieces, the shard and the larynx, made from the same glass, born of the same origin. "Put them together," Elias said hoarsely. "See what it shows." Marla hesitated, then slowly she pressed the shard against the cracked seam in the pendant. It fit. A thin hairline gap glowed orange, and then the pendant sang, not hummed. Sang a low, haunting note that seemed to come from the marrow of the manor itself, vibrating through the floors and walls. All around them, the mirrors shook, and the chandelier chimed gently. Caris gasped. "The memory's reforming," she whispered. "It's reattaching." And Marla, for the first time since arriving, remembered. The fire, the circle carved in ash, the way Maeve looked at her with pleading eyes and whispered, "Just for tonight, let me have your scream." The way she had nodded, and then run. Left her sister to face it alone. The orchard had taken her, and she'd never looked back. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Elias said nothing. Caris knelt beside her. "It's not too late," she said softly. "But the orchard needs a voice." "Someone's voice, that's how it blooms, that's how it feeds." Marla looked up, eyes wild, and then the manor groaned. The back wall cracked open, vines of glass and root twisting through the stone like veins made of ice, and from the center of them, a girl emerged, her eyes empty, her mouth sealed shut, her skin glowing with frost, Maeve, or what was left of her. She stepped forward, glass creaking inside her limbs, and raised a single finger, pointed at Marla. And then, without speaking, her voice filled the room. "Give it back." Maeve's mouth never opened, but the voice, her voice, pressed against every wall of the manor like steam behind wallpaper. Not just sound, pressure, memory, weight. As though what had once been breath and throat had fossilized into something else, and was now being exhaled in pieces from inside the walls, the trees, the very bones of the house. "Give it back," she had said. Marla stared. Maeve's body stood framed by the shattered back wall, flanked by coils of glass roots and thorned vines pulsing with soft blue light. Frost feathered outward from her feet, creeping into the floorboards. Her skin was no longer flesh. It was a composite of old bark and blown crystal, semi-transparent in places, revealing moving things beneath the surface, shimmers of color like trapped screams. Her hair had fused into strands of bramble, swaying as if underwater. And still that voice, calm, girlish and furious, circled the room. Elias stepped forward with his axe lowered. "Don't get close," he said, eyes fixed on Maeve. "That thing isn't your sister anymore. It just wears her memory." Maeve's head tilted slightly. From behind her lips, still stitched shut with silver threads, a sound emerged, wet and crackling, like a broken phonograph. A giggle, one Marla had not heard since she was 8. Then Maeve stepped inside. Her bare feet clicked against the tile. The floor beneath her froze with each footfall. The air grew denser, damper. Candles flickered and died. The recorder on the table hissed and shorted out. Marla reached instinctively into her pocket and gripped the reconstructed pendant, now glowing faintly where the shard had sealed it. Immediately Maeve paused. Her stitched lips trembled. From behind, "The threads," she whispered. "You still wear what you stole." Elias raised the axe. Maeve turned to him, not with violence, with disappointment. "You burned the orchard once," she said, "but you didn't burn the root." Elias stepped back, fear cracking through his voice. "I didn't know then what I know now." Maeve extended a hand. Glass veins ran through her wrist, pulsing with faint light. "It grew anyway because she forgot me." Marla flinched. The words burrowed into her chest like hornets. Her hand trembled against the pendant. Karis moved to her side, whispering, "Don't believe everything it says. It's half her and half the thing that took her." But Marla was barely listening. She stared at her sister, who looked so much like the girl she remembered, except preserved, frozen in time and grief. Like the orchard had become a reliquary for pain too loud to be buried. And she felt it again, that pull behind her ribs. Not terror, not guilt, recognition. Maeve took another step. The frost reached the table, crept across Marla's journal and froze the ink mid-sentence. "You buried my voice," Maeve whispered. "But I rooted yours." Then her voice dropped. Deeper now, adult and alien. "Let's switch again." Marla staggered back. The pendant burned cold in her palm. Later, after Elias had forced the back wall closed again with a crash of bookcases and salt, Marla sat alone in the library, wrapped in 3 blankets, staring at the warped mirror. Above the fireplace, Maeve's reflection had never left it. Even now, it hovered just behind her shoulder, visible only in the glass, not the room itself, smiling, waiting. Marla opened her grandmother's old journal, one she hadn't seen in years. It had been tucked in a false drawer under the library's bottom shelf, behind loose floorboards that had shifted when Maeve's frost swept the room. The cover bore no title, only a sigil. A tree with 2 mouths, one open, one sealed. Inside, the entries were short, frantic, scattered like dried petals across brittle parchment. April 17th. Maeve's voice has started to echo in the orchard even when she's inside the house. I've told the girls to stop playing out there, but they say the trees talk better than I do. May 2nd. Marla does not speak anymore. The IE. Doctor says it's selective. I say it's stolen. Maeve smiles too much now, as if the silence is feeding her. May 6th. I watched them perform the rhyme. I didn't stop them. I wanted to see if it worked. My daughter blames me for everything. Perhaps she should. I buried the wrong twin. Marla's throat tightened. She turned the page. May 7. I left the first offering beneath the frost tree. A tooth from my own mouth. It whispered for 3 nights. Then it sang. Then it begged me to stop. May 8th. Maeve is changing. Her breath leaves frost behind. Her laugh sounds like it's bouncing off cathedral ceilings. I heard her speaking in Marla's voice last night. May 9th. The orchard will not be burned. Not unless one of the twins returns the route they took. Beneath this, a single phrase. Voices are not lost. They are buried. But buried things grow. Marla looked up. The mirror had fogged. From within it, Maeve's breath was visible now, misting the glass, as though the mirror had become her lungs. Then, another message scrawled across the page in a different hand. Maeve's. If you won't return it, I'll plant it in someone else. Marla snapped the book shut. Her hands shook. She stepped to the recorder and clicked it on with trembling fingers. Day 3. Confirmed presence of Maeve. Partial or full manifestation. Vocal signature matches pre-incident audio. Entity possesses autonomy and memory. Mirror-bound residue confirmed. Suggests ontological bleed, emotional stability deteriorating, shame increasing. She stopped. Then, voice cracking in a whisper, she forced herself to say the words aloud for the recorder. Maeve. I didn't mean to. It was the first thing she had spoken in 23 years, and the manor heard her. The pipes groaned above. Glass in the windows rattled with approval. The pendant warmed, and then the chimes in the orchard began to sing, a full melody this time, not random tinkling or coded taps. It was the lullaby. One for the silence, one for the flame. Give back the voice or take back the name. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Elias appeared in the doorway, holding something wrapped in a strip of burned cloth. I went back to the root, he said. I dug under the frost. He unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a second pendant, identical to Marla's, uncracked, whole, and still warm. She made a second offering, he said. Years ago, after the fire, before she disappeared, he placed it beside the one Marla held. They glowed in tandem. Then, to her horror, they began to hum in harmony. Karis stepped in behind him, her expression grim. She doesn't want just one voice anymore, she said. She wants to bind them. Marla looked up. The frost on the window pane cracked. A message etched itself there in reverse script, letters melting into the ice. Bring both to the heart, or I'll take hers instead. Karis gasped. She means me. Elias looked away. Marla stared at the two pendants, two sisters, two silences, one root. Outside, the orchard shuddered like something breathing through lungs made of wind and memory, and from the mirror behind her, Maeve whispered one final time, I won't wait another winter. The following morning was unlike any that had come before it at Wither Orchard. Marla woke not to silence, but to the sound of a man's voice shouting through fog, rough, guttural, familiar in a way that made her gut twist before her mind had caught up. She moved to the window. Down the winding path that snaked from the road to the manor gates, a black sedan idled, steam curling from the exhaust. A man stood beside it, tall, broad-shouldered, a long wool coat whipping in the wind. He was shouting something at the orchard. She couldn't hear the words, but she knew the voice. Jonah Evesend, her father. He hadn't been to Wither Orchard in 20 years, not since her grandmother's funeral, not since he fled whatever guilt had haunted him from the night of the fire. But now he was here, and the orchard had already heard him. Marla threw on her coat, tucked the twin pendants into her pocket, hers and Maeve's, and ran downstairs. Her boots struck the steps with hard, echoing thuds. Elias was already at the door, axe in hand, peering through the crack in the wood. Well, he muttered, the prodigal bastard returns. Marla nodded once and reached for the door handle. Karis, behind them spoke low. "If he crosses the orchard, it'll remember him." Marla paused, but the shouting outside grew louder, more insistent. She opened the door. The wind hit her like a slap, ice-flecked and sharp. The orchard, now thick, with frost and leaning slightly inward, loomed to her left. The manor stood behind her like a held breath. Jonah stood at the gate, fists clenched, hair wet with dew. When he saw her, his shoulders slumped just for a second. He took a step forward, then another, until he stood inside the gate, inside the boundary. "Marla," he said. His voice was smoke, gravel, years of swallowed truths. She said nothing. He looked at her, really looked, for the first time in decades. "You kept it," he said. "The land." Marla didn't nod. He looked at the orchard. "Why the hell didn't you burn it?" Still, she said nothing. Jonah looked older than she remembered, not just aged, eroded, like the wind had been carving pieces from him since the night he left. His eyes, once sharp, were now glassy with some inner rot. He stepped closer. "I'm here to finish it. The orchard. I have the documents. I'm selling this place, Marla. I'm selling the whole goddamn hollow." At that, Marla raised a hand. She pointed, not at him, but at the trees behind him. Jonah turned. They were watching, or more precisely, leaning. The orchard had bent slightly forward, as if the glass trees were craning their trunks to hear him better. "Let them listen," he spat. "I gave them enough already." The air grew colder. He glanced back at her. "Your grandmother lied to all of us. She said the orchard was a gift, said it kept the family legacy. But it doesn't give, Marla. It takes. That's all it ever did." She stared at him, and slowly she reached into her coat, pulled out one of the pendants. Jonah went still. His lips parted. Something like recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by fear. "You still have it," he said softly. "That goddamn thing. She pulled it from the dirt, you know that?" Marla nodded. "Buried it after the fire. Buried everything. And I let her." He stepped backward, toward the orchard. The wind shifted, and the trees sang. Not a lullaby, not a warning, but something darker, a name. "Jonah, Jonah, Jonah." He turned pale. "That's not possible," he whispered. "They shouldn't know my name, but they did." Because he had planted something here once too. Inside, Marla sat across from him in the kitchen, recorder ticking softly beside them. A pot of black tea steaming between them both like a truce they didn't trust. Jonah drank with trembling hands. "The night of the fire," he said. "I saw it. The thing in the orchard." He didn't look at her. "I didn't stop it. I didn't save her." He took another sip. "I knew you'd forget. The hollow makes sure of that. It unspools memory like thread." He paused. "You never screamed, not once, even when the flames took half the house. You just watched." Marla's face was stone. Karis leaned against the doorway, listening silently. Elias stood near the hearth, arms crossed. Jonah continued. "After Maeve disappeared, your grandmother made me promise never to talk about it. She said the trees were holding something at bay, that if we fed it, it would stay asleep." Marla wrote in her notebook and turned it toward him. "What did you feed it?" He read it, then looked away. "I gave it your name," he said. The room went silent. Karis whispered, "What?" "She wouldn't let me give it my own. Said the orchard needed a child's promise, a child's memory, something unspoiled." He looked at Marla, eyes hollow. "That's why you can't remember the fire, why you can't speak. We buried your voice and gave it to the root." The pendant buzzed against her chest. Marla stood. Her hands were shaking. Karis whispered, "He's the reason the root grew." "Back!" Elias's face darkened. "You son of a—" Jonah stood quickly. "I was trying to save her," he shouted. "I was trying to stop what came through the frost. What your grandmother let in." He pointed at the orchard. "She called it the voice keeper. said it waits beneath the roots for silence, for grief, for offered names. And I... He stopped. The pendant glowed. A sound began to build. Not in the house, in Jonah. From his throat came a faint chime. He clutched at it, coughing. The sound grew louder. His eyes rolled back. He dropped to his knees. "Marla," he gasped. "It's in me." From his mouth spilled teeth, small, milk-white glass teeth, clinking onto the floor in a slow cascade. Blood followed, thick and dark. Then a voice emerged from his open throat, not his own, Maeve's. I already had his name. Now I want the rest. Marla backed away. Karis screamed. Jonah's body convulsed, then slumped forward, hollowed out. Like a bell struck too hard, the pendant around Marla's neck turned black, and the orchard outside laughed. They buried Jonah that night, though buried was not quite the word. There was no funeral, no prayers, no coffin, only a hole behind the frost-blighted greenhouse, dug in silence by Elias and lined with iron nails and salt. Karis stood above, it clutching a lantern. Marla did not weep. Her hands stayed pressed to her coat pocket, fingers wrapped around the pendant that had turned black in her palm. The glass was cold now, colder than it had ever been, like it had pulled winter into itself and grown hollow. Elias had wrapped Jonah's body in thick burlap soaked in whiskey. It hadn't bled, not even once. When he rolled him into the earth, the sound was wrong, not soft soil accepting weight, but something harder. As if the orchard beneath the roots had calcified. "He's not really gone," Elias muttered as he covered the body with a final shovelful of salt-laced earth. "He's just gone inward." Marla stared into the pit long after the last clod of dirt had fallen. The frost beneath her boots trembled. That night, the house breathed like it was preparing for something. The walls creaked. The pipes sang. The windows fogged over with shapes that looked like fingers, hands, open mouths. The fireplace flared for no reason and then smothered itself. Marla didn't sleep. Instead, she stood at the cellar door until dawn, listening. Because the music had started again. It began as a whisper, an echo with no source, like a thought someone else was having inside your skull. A scratch of wind behind brick. A warbled hum that mimicked the pitch of Maeve's old singing voice, but off by just enough to twist it into something that sounded diseased. By 3 a.m., it was a full melody. From below, the cellar, she opened the door. Frost licked the air, coiling, up the stairwell in thick ribbons. The scent of burned wood and mildew was gone, replaced with something cleaner, like steamed glass, like the inside of a cathedral window. The recorder in her coat clicked softly as she descended. Day 4. Sub-basement melody activated at 2:58 a.m. Unknown source. Pitch mimics pre-ritual voice signature of Maeve Evesend. Emotional state, resistant detachment. Physical state, cold in sternum, pressure behind eyes. At the bottom of the stairs, the cellar had changed. It was larger, too large. The brick walls were farther apart than she remembered. The floor was now sloped, subtly, but unmistakably, as if the cellar had begun to lean toward the orchard itself. Glass roots curled in from the corners, like veins threading through plaster. The old phonograph sat in the middle of the room on a wooden stool, turning slowly. No electricity, no power. But it played. A warped vinyl disc turned beneath the needle, spinning a tune that sounded stitched from pieces of childhood songs. Ring Around the Rosie, Rockabye Baby, and something else. Something older. Marla stepped closer. The tune became words. Maeve's voice, unmistakable, sung low and sweet. One for the breath, one for the bone. Bury your name, or be buried alone. Marla pressed stop. The record didn't respond. It kept spinning. She grabbed the tone arm and snapped it off. The music continued, then a click behind her. She turned sharply. The far wall of the cellar, once solid brick, had opened. Just a seam. At first, then a vertical split, revealing a narrow passageway lined in frost and etched with dozens of tiny mouth shapes. The same mouths she'd seen bloom from the saplings in the orchard, now engraved in stone. They were singing. Not loud, subvocal, subterranean. She stepped inside. The air grew tighter, moister. The pendant in her coat pocket warmed again. Not violently, but rhythmically, in sync with her own heartbeat. Like it was anticipating something. The passage sloped downward, spiraling. She lost sense of depth, of time. The recorder ticked on her chest. Then she entered the room, a vault, circular. At its center stood a stone plinth, and resting atop it was a wooden box. The kind you'd find at a gravesite, but wrong in proportion, too long, too narrow. The lid was made of translucent glass, and beneath it, a throat, not a body, not a head, just a throat suspended in some kind of resin. Pale, with threads of black glass running through its vocal cords like ivy. It twitched once as she stepped closer, and then a sound burst from it, not into the air, but into her mind. You ran. Marla clutched her skull. The voice came again. You gave me the silence, but not the scream. The resin cracked. One long fracture down the middle. Marla stepped back. On the floor around the plinth, she saw symbols, not runes, not letters, but musical notation, scrawled into the stone in a circle. Sharp, erratic. Every note bleeding into the next. A song meant never to end. The resin cracked again. Then a voice, different now, older, her grandmother's. This is where they put it, the throat of the E. Orchard, the first one, another crack. It was meant to hold the memory, but it keeps the guilt instead. The glass shattered. The throat slumped forward, then twitched, and began to drag itself across the plinth, not with muscle, with roots. Marla fled. She sprinted back through the frost corridor as the singing rose behind her. Hundreds of voices now, all in dissonant harmony. One for the voice, one for the flame, give back the scream, or go without name. She slammed the door shut behind her, locking the cellar with a rusted bolt. The music stopped instantly. Silence fell. But as she turned to flee back upstairs, she froze. A new line had been carved into the staircase wall, fresh, still steaming. You can't run again. Beneath it, in red. We heard you the first time. And from the shadows at the base of the stairs, a voice, her own, aged younger, by decades, whispered, I didn't mean to leave you. The next morning arrived shivering. Marla awoke not to the ticking of glass chimes or frost breath on the windows, but to the low thud of something heavy being dragged across the manor floor. She sat upright, heart pounding, instinctively pressing, her hand to the inside of her coat, to the pendant that had grown colder again, as if recoiling from the memory of the throat vault below. Its glass surface, once warm and pulsating, now felt inert, like a shard of someone else's silence, lodged in her skin. The dragging sound grew louder, then paused, then resumed. She slipped from bed and padded down the corridor barefoot, every creak in the floorboards a voice she was too afraid to understand. The light in the manor had shifted, not morning brightness, but the blue-grey pallor, a frostlight heavy and low, crawling in from every window pane. She found Elias in the foyer. He was bent over, breathless, pulling something wrapped in a torn curtain across the entry tiles. It leaked a thick, dark sap as it dragged, leaving a glossy black trail. Caris stood nearby, arms wrapped tightly around herself, face pale. What is that? Marla mouthed silently. Elias didn't answer. Instead, he grunted, pulled the curtain back, and revealed a torso-sized glass fruit, pulsing faintly like a heart encased in crystal. Inside it, suspended in the amber-like fluid, floated a human ribcage. Marla recoiled. "It grew overnight," Elias said, breath fogging. "Right, where we buried your father. The orchard had taken him, and then bore fruit." Karis stepped forward, her voice brittle. It's feeding now, not just from voices or memories. It's feeding from the dead." Marla leaned down, examining the fruit's exterior. It was warm, too warm for glass. Hairline fractures spiraled through it like stress veins. On one side, where the light hit, she could just make out the imprint of a face pressed against the interior. Jonah. His mouth was wide open, not in pain, in a scream, but silent. Marla stumbled back, her vision blurring. The scream he never gave. The one he buried. The one she never shared. Now preserved. Eaten. Echoed. Elias stood, wiping sap from his hands. "This is what it does. The orchard doesn't just grow from pain. It blooms from what people don't say." He gestured to the ribcage. "Fruit. Every branch out there?" That's someone's voice wrapped in glass, not the words they spoke, the ones they choked back. Karis muttered, "That explains the orchard's shape. It's not a grove, it's an archive." Marla's recorder clicked softly in her coat. Day 5. Manifestation of funerary fruit confirmed. Contents: remains of Jonah Evsend, fused with orchard secretion. Vocal fragment retained. Symbolic confirmation. Orchard as mnemonic consumption site. Blooming phase accelerating. They moved the fruit to the shed out back, sealing it in a chest lined with salt and iron, though they all knew it would not hold. That afternoon, the orchard began to change. Marla stood at the upstairs window for hours, watching the trees shift. What had once been a forest of tall, still spires had grown grotesque extensions, roots that twisted above the earth like skeletal hands, and trunks that breathed, expanding and collapsing as if the trees were trying to speak with no mouths. Some of the branches now curled together, forming archways. Others had grown downwards, piercing the ground like spears. And the wind had changed tone. It no longer made the chimes tinkle. It howled in vowels, long, slow, phonetic exhalations. Not words, not yet, but almost. Karis sat cross-legged in the library, surrounded by open books and field notes. She flipped through the pages of Rituals of the Hollow again, tracing her fingers over a passage that had once been smudged, but now seemed to shimmer faintly under the new frostlight. The orchard is not a place. It is a shape. The shape of grief when left unspoken. Each glass limb a trapped syllable, each fruit a withheld scream. Marla leaned over her shoulder, pointing at the next line. Karis whispered it aloud. "When the root has grown fat on silence, it will open the throat of the hollow, and it will speak the name that no one dares remember." Marla backed away, spine tingling. That night, she recorded a message for herself, the first time she spoke aloud without the orchard forcing her. Her voice was quiet, raw. I don't remember what I said to her that night. Maybe I didn't say anything. Maybe that was the problem. She sat on the edge of her bed, pendants in her lap, watching the frost bloom outward across the windows, forming geometric sigils she had never learned, but instinctively understood. At midnight, the house went dead quiet, not peaceful, not silent, expectant. Then the cellar door creaked open. Marla rose, heart hammering. Elias and Karis were already standing in the hall. Neither spoke. They followed her. The stairs groaned. The frost had crept down the walls. The air shimmered with a dull haze. At the base of the stairs, the phonograph was gone. In its place sat a new object, a wooden throat mask, the kind worn in forgotten rituals to muffle screams, carved with a tree in the center and dozens of tiny teeth embedded around the jawline. As she approached, the mask vibrated, and from the walls the glass roots began to sing again. But this time, it was a voice they hadn't heard yet. Marla's younger trapped, repeating a single phrase over and over with increasing desperation. "I'll scream for her. I will, I promise. Just don't take her. I'll scream, I'll scream, I'll scream." Then silence. Elias fell to his knees, hand over his mouth. Karis turned away, sobbing, and Marla stood perfectly still. She remembered now. She did scream, but it wasn't heard, because it had been fed to the orchard. And now it was ripe. In her coat, both pendants burned like coals. From behind the throat mask, something began to press forward. Not a person, a shape of glass and root, a new tree, growing inside the cellar. Still here? Brave. Or maybe you just like the feeling of being watched. Like, subscribe, and drop your time and location in the comments, so we know who's still out there. Now breathe slow. The worst is coming. The new tree took shape slowly, its growth unnatural, not stretching toward light but curling inward, toward sound. Marla watched from the threshold of the cellar as the glass began to breathe. It grew from the earth, not with violence but precision, each branch forming as if traced from a blueprint long buried beneath the house. The roots sprouted first, gnarled and rib-like, twisting across the floorboards and pulling down into the stone. Then came the trunk, transparent and hollow, veins of black frost spidering through it. From the trunk's center, a slow pulse throbbed, in time with her heartbeat. Atop the tree sat a single mouth, not part of any face, just lips and teeth and tongue, suspended like a fruit from the lowest bough. It opened, and Marla's voice came out. "Please don't take her, I'll speak instead. I'll give you mine." Karis covered her ears. Elias turned pale and whispered, "That's not a tree, that's you." The pendant in Marla's coat grew hot. She pulled it out, the once blackened glass now glowing a deep crimson. Cracks radiated across its surface like blood vessels. The other pendant, Maeve's, pulsed too, but colder, slower, like it beat from inside a grave. Something shifted beneath the floor, a sound like breath being drawn through the belly of the house. The voice from the tree continued. "I didn't want to scream. I just didn't want to forget." Then the mouth bit down. The entire tree shrieked. Every glass chime in the orchard detonated in a cacophony outside. Windows across the manor spiderwebbed. The cellar's frost-flaked walls moaned, and from beneath the floorboards came a crack. Not wood, not stone. Bone, Karis screamed. Elias grabbed Marla by the arm and pulled her back into the hallway, just as a root punched through the cellar wall, snaking up the stairwell. It moved like a blind thing, searching, twitching, tasting the air. It brushed Karis's coat and she collapsed with a cry, clutching her throat. Marla dragged her away as Elias hacked at the root with the axe, striking again and again. The glass embedded in the bark split, bleeding a clear, sticky sap that steamed when it hit the ground. The root retreated with a hiss. They slammed the cellar door shut and bolted it. Upstairs, they laid Karis on the couch. She trembled, eyes fluttering. Marla touched her cheek. Karis grabbed her wrist, mouth moving soundlessly. No sound came out, her eyes filled with panic. "She can't speak," Elias said, backing away. "It took her voice." Marla clutched the twin pendants. Maeve's was flickering, its glow dimming with every beat. Her own burned hotter now, searing through the fabric of her coat. From the upstairs landing, a mirror shattered inward, spraying shards across the hallway. In its frame, something looked back. Not a reflection. A version of Marla, younger, mouth open in horror, eyes fixed on something out of frame. A loop. A moment trapped. And from the glass came Maeve's voice, louder now, clearer. "You gave me silence. I returned it. Now scream, Marla, or I will." The manor shuddered. Books tumbled from shelves. Paintings wept frost. The orchard outside began to glow from within, as if every tree held a candle in its belly, each flickering red with breath. Elias stared out the window. "It's starting." Marla followed his gaze. The archway of trees in the orchard had fully formed, an open throat in the shape of branches curving inward. Through it, she could see nothing. Not the forest. Not the sky, just darkness, thick and shifting, like the back of a throat. The voice keeper was opening. Elias turned to Marla. "We have to destroy the root." She nodded slowly. He held up the axe. "This won't be enough." Marla pulled the shard from her coat pocket, the one she'd fused into the pendant. The only piece that didn't vibrate when the orchard sang. Elias looked at it and nodded grimly. "That's what made the first cut," he said. "Use it again." They returned to the cellar just before dusk. Caris remained upstairs, sedated, her voice still stolen, her breath shallow. She clutched Marla's recorder as if it were her own mouth. The air in the basement was heavy, pressed with memory. The tree in the center had grown larger, not taller, but denser. Its branches now filled the ceiling. Roots pulsed along the floor like veins. The mouth at its center hung open, waiting. Marla approached with the shard. The tree pulsed once, then again, a beat, a heart, a memory, and then it spoke. Not Maeve, not Marla, but their grandmother's voice. "This was the price. You made the vow. If one twin is taken, the other must remember." Elias stepped beside her, axe ready. The root mouth hissed again. "But you forgot, child, and forgetting is a kind of killing." Marla raised the shard, but before she could strike, the tree sang. She buried her scream. You let her, and now it blooms. The cellar exploded in light. From the base of the tree, a face began to form, not made of bark, not flesh, glass, Maeve. Her face grew into the tree like a trapped thing trying to rise from resin. Her mouth opened, Marla's scream, the one she never gave, poured out in a sound so piercing it cracked every mirror in the house. Elias dropped the axe, fell to his knees, bleeding from the ears, and Marla gripped the shard and ran upstairs, toward the orchard, toward the archway, toward the thing that had bloomed in silence for too long. She didn't look back, but behind her, the cellar door swung open, and Maeve stepped through. Not walking, growing. The orchard was no longer a place, it was a mouth, and Marla was running into it. She sprinted across the brittle, frost-coated grass, past the shattered gates, through the rows of glass-bark trees that now pulsed with their own internal rhythm. Not wind, not breath, a song. The orchard's trunks vibrated softly, each tree humming a different note, creating a low, dissonant harmony that scraped at the back of her teeth like bone on metal. The archway, grown overnight from the oldest trees, stood ahead. It was massive now, big enough to fit the manor itself, its branches woven together into a shape that looked more organic than arboreal. Marla stopped just short of crossing its threshold. The air inside the archway was wrong, too thick, too still. It shimmered faintly, as if something ancient exhaled there, not air, but memory. Breathing not outward, but inward, a place that swallowed history. Behind her, the manor let out a deep, resonant groan, the sound of an entire structure remembering. Then came the bells. Not real bells. There had never been a bell tower. But the chimes. Every single tooth chime embedded in the orchard branches began to ring in unison. Not a melody, a warning, a dirge. She turned and saw Elias stumbling out from the house, axe gone, hands red and slick with frostbite or blood, or both. He collapsed near the first row of trees. Marla ran to him. "I couldn't hold her," he choked. "She came through the walls. Not like before. She wasn't her anymore." He looked up at Marla, eyes wet and bloodshot. "She wears your voice now." Marla felt something shift in her chest, a pressure behind her ribs, as if her own lungs didn't quite belong to her anymore. The pendant burned against her skin, and she realized with growing horror she couldn't feel her own heartbeat. The orchard was trying to sink her like it had sinked the trees, the cellar, the throat vault. The voice she had buried was being grafted back into her, whether she wanted it or not. Elias gripped her sleeve. "I saw what's at the heart," he gasped. "I followed the roots when you ran." His hand shook violently as he pointed toward the archway. "It's not just her in there." Marla leaned close. "It's all of them. They buried Elias in the orchard, not in the ground. There was no time and no point, but in the hollow of one of the older trees. The bark opened willingly, like a mouth, and when they placed his body inside, the tree hummed a new note, low, gentle, like it was digesting him kindly. The note didn't fade. It joined the others, a new voice in the chorus of silence. Marla stood back and watched the bark close over him like a wound sealing shut. She thought he might scream, but he didn't, because he had already said everything he needed to, and that's what protected him in the end. She wasn't sure she'd be that lucky. Karis joined her at the edge of the orchard, her voice still. Stolen, communicating now only by notepad. She scrawled, "It's making more of them, all over the orchard. Root fruit, mouths, shells." She flipped to the next page. One of them was breathing. It looked like Jonah, but it sang with your voice. Marla blinked slowly, the weight of it all finally bearing down. For a brief moment, her knees buckled. She gripped the nearest tree for support. Its surface was warm to the touch, like skin. It vibrated slightly. "Speak." The word appeared not in sound, but as a feeling, embedded in the palm of her hand. She yanked it away. "No," she whispered. "Not yet." The tree quivered. Then came the animal. It stumbled into the orchard from the tree line. A red fox. Its fur matted with frost, eyes wide and cloudy. It moved strangely, as though following sound rather than sight. It turned toward them and opened its mouth. No snarl, no bark. A human whisper. "We are ready," Karis screamed, not from her mouth, but from the recorder she carried. It emitted a static shriek, followed by her own voice, recorded from 2 days ago. "They're going to use me. I hear it every night. The orchard wants my voice next." Then silence. Karis dropped the device and stumbled away, clutching her throat. The fox slumped sideways and shattered, revealing shards of blown glass within its ribcage. Inside them, a single human tooth. Marla's legs moved before she even knew where she was going. She ran. Back to the manor, back to the attic. The trunk at the top of the stairs was already open. Inside, the books were gone, replaced with something new. A mirror. Small, rectangular, encased in a frame of gnarled wood and chime fragments. It looked handmade, ritualistic, old. The surface rippled, reflecting not her face but Maeve's. Not the way she had looked when she was 8. But now, half tree, half girl, mouth open, eyes flickering with frostlight. "You kept me under your skin," she whispered. "Now I keep you under mine." Then, from the far corner of the attic, a sound. Crunching, chewing. Marla turned, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. A figure hunched in the corner, human-shaped, gnawing on something. She approached slowly. Her flashlight trembled. The figure lifted its head. It had no mouth, only smooth, polished glass where its lower jaw should be. Inside its chest, a cavity filled with teeth, child size, human. It reached toward her with both hands, held out a mirror. In its reflection, Marla. Mouth sewn shut, eyes wide, and the pendant. Both pendants fused into her sternum like a brooch. She stepped back. The mirror cracked. The attic door slammed shut behind her, and then everything went black. She awoke to silence. Total silence. Even the orchard had stopped singing. She sat up. The attic was empty now. Mirror gone, figure gone, just frost. But her hands were covered in blood, and beside her, on the floor, carved into the wood, were words written in blood and sap. She will bloom from your scream. And underneath it, pressed carefully into the crack of the floorboards, was a tiny, perfect glass fruit, shaped like a human larynx. It pulsed once, twice, and began to breathe. The glass larynx on the attic floor pulsed like a heart without a body, slow, deliberate, wet with frost. Each breath it drew in made the room colder, and each breath it exhaled released a sound not meant for ears. A muffled child's cry, submerged in syrup and memory. Marla backed away from it slowly, but something deep in her ribs moved in response. A pulling, like a yawn in reverse, like a muscle flexing to speak on its own. The larynx wasn't just breathing. It was trying to harmonize with her, and it was winning. She dropped to her knees, gasping for air, the edges of her vision going dark. Her pendant, still fused with the shard, pulsed violently under her coat, reacting to the rhythm of the glass organ before her. Then, a voice from behind her. "Don't touch it!" She turned fast, heart stuttering, Caris Vale, pale, shaking, face hollow, standing in the attic doorway. She had found her voice again, but it was wrong, too soft, too familiar. "Maeve's voice, Caris," Marla whispered, not trusting her own throat. Caris didn't answer at first. She walked slowly into the attic, each footstep crunching on brittle frost. Her eyes were distant. Her lips moved, but the words weren't hers. "I waited for you to come back. I waited for you to speak for me. You promised you would scream." Marla stood. "What are you?" she whispered. Caris blinked. Her voice, her real voice, fought its way back to the surface. I didn't mean to let her in," she said, eyes flooding with panic. "She's inside me, Marla. She's using me." And then she dropped to her knees, convulsing, clutching her throat. The scream that came from her mouth was not human. It was the sound of the orchard in winter, of trees snapping under weight, of frost cracking bones. It shook the attic, shook the manor. Marla grabbed the glass larynx and smashed it against the floor. A high-pitched shriek cut through the air, sharp, insectile, like crystal being shaved to dust. And then, silence. Caris collapsed. Marla rushed to her, cradling her against her shoulder. "She knows now," Caris gasped. "Knows what?" Caris's eyes fluttered. She reached into her coat, pulled out a bundle of damp, crumbling paper. Maeve's old diary, burned at the corners, seared through the middle, but legible just barely. Marla opened it. Inside, page after page, were drawings, children's hands, holding candles, mouths stitched shut with twine, trees shaped like human torsos, a twin screaming while the other looked away. One entry was clear. The fire wasn't an accident. It was the last part of the ritual. Marla froze. Caris choked. Out the rest. "You didn't forget because of trauma. You forgot because you chose to. It was part of the price." And then she went still. A single line of frost spread from her lips, across her cheek. Marla screamed, but no sound came out. Downstairs, the house had begun to unravel. The glass in every mirror had warped. now filled with shapes not reflected from the room, but from memory. Not her memories, not exactly. They were versions, twisted, distorted. In the study mirror, she saw herself and Maeve standing in the orchard at night, hands clasped, reciting the rhyme. But in this version, it was Marla who finished the final verse. One for the blood, one for the scream. And it was Maeve who tried to run. In the hallway mirror, she saw her grandmother standing over a glass cradle, singing softly as two tongues writhed inside. In the mirror near the foyer, she saw her father, younger, weeping, as he placed the cracked pendant into the earth beneath the oldest tree. But it was the bathroom mirror, shattered years ago, now inexplicably whole. That showed the worst vision, the night of the fire. Marla was crouched beneath the bed, watching. Maeve stood alone in the attic, clutching the pendant, crying. Then the walls caught light, from the inside out. No matches. No accident. The fire had bloomed from the wood itself, a gift from the orchard. Maeve screamed once, and Marla covered her ears. If I don't hear it, the mirror Marla whispered, I won't remember it. The flames swallowed the vision. The mirror cracked, and the entire house lurched. Books fell from shelves. Chimes outside ceased their harmonizing. Marla collapsed to her knees. She clutched the fused pendant, now boiling against her skin, and whispered, the words she had never allowed herself to say. I left her. A low voice behind her. And now you can bring her back. She turned. Maeve stood in the parlor doorway, not the child she remembered, not the creature from the orchard, but a fusion, a girl made of glass and memory and song. Her mouth was open. Inside, Marla saw her own tongue. Maeve smiled. You have my name, she said softly. I want it back. Marla shook her head. No. Maeve stepped closer. Then I'll take what I'm owed. From the orchard, a sound rose. Not a chorus this time, but a note, a single resonant E, vibrating the windows, the floors, the bones inside her skull. It was the sound of a name unspoken too long. It was the sound of something finally remembering itself. Marla stood. I won't let you bloom in me. Maeve cocked her head. You already did. She stepped forward, and the air between them shattered. When the air shattered between them, it didn't explode with sound. It imploded with memory. 1,000 moments. Voices, breath, screams swallowed and unscreamed, flooded into Marla's ears all at once. Not her own, not just Maeve's, but everyone's. The orchard was speaking through her. Each step Maeve took across the frost-glazed parlor floor peeled back time like wallpaper. The walls wept water. The floorboards curled. Glass veins burst through the seams of the house, threading through the ceiling beams like parasitic roots, not growing, but unfolding, like they'd been inside all along, waiting. Give it back, Maeve said again, voice low and inhumanly calm, layered with the echoes of voices that weren't hers. Marla stepped back. Her heel struck the iron radiator with a thud. She turned to flee. But the hallway had collapsed into something else entirely, not a hallway, a corridor of mouths, each wall lined with open, gasping lips, teeth clattering behind glass. They whispered her name in dozens of dialects, childlike, elderly, familiar, foreign. Marla. Marla. You left her. She screamed for you. Why didn't you answer? She slammed the door beside her. The room was the kitchen, but warped. Walls covered in bark, the faucet weeping sap instead of water. From the overhead vent came a wet, fluttering sound, like moths made of paper struggling to take flight. Then, pounding on the window, a fist. Elias, alive, barely. She tore open the back door, grabbed his coat, and pulled him inside. He stumbled, body slick with blood and frost. His lips were blue, his eyes milky. God, Marla whispered. "What happened to you?" He coughed, and a leaf came out, a perfect veined red glass leaf. Another fell from the back of his coat, slick with dark. "Sap, they opened me," he rasped. "The trees. They opened me." He collapsed to his knees on the kitchen floor, one hand gripping the table for balance. Maeve's voice is rooted in all of them now. She's not just in the orchard. She is the orchard. Marla knelt beside him, tearing her coat open. I can stop her. I have the pendant." Elias's fingers closed around her wrist with surprising force. "You don't stop a root, girl," he whispered. "You pull it out, or you let it take you." His hand trembled as he reached into his shirt and withdrew, something wrapped in burlap. Marla opened it. The original ritual blade, a thin black obsidian shard, carved with the sigil of the double mouth, one open, one sealed. The same symbol etched on her grandmother's journal and in Maeve's diary. Elias coughed again. More leaves fell from his mouth. "You have to finish it," he groaned. "The cut. The first one never went deep enough." Marla's heart raced. "What cut?" Elias closed his eyes. "You have to choose who keeps the name." Then the back window shattered. A root, thick as a thigh, punched through the glass, coiled around Elias's chest, and lifted him into the air. Marla screamed, but Elias didn't. He just locked eyes with her. A moment of strange, peaceful clarity. And then he said, "Don't bury her voice. Bury the silence." The root snapped tight. His body convulsed and then split. Down the center, not with blood, but with leaves. Thousands of tiny red glass leaves burst from within him, scattering across the room like shattered prayers. His body fell in halves, empty as a seed pod, still steaming. The root slithered back into the earth. Marla didn't cry. There wasn't time. She wrapped the obsidian shard in her fist and ran, her boots crunching over the leaves, the kitchen now, slick with Elias's remains. She made it upstairs as the orchard song began again, low and methodical, pulsing through the house's framework like a heartbeat. Caris was awake now, pale and silent, seated in the upstairs hallway surrounded by broken mirrors. Her voice hadn't returned. Her eyes darted between the reflections like someone caught in a room full of doors, none of them real. Marla knelt beside her, took both of her hands. She didn't try to speak, just stared into her eyes. And then Caris did something unexpected. She nodded once, then again, then pulled something from her coat pocket, Maeve's ribbon, the red one, scorched at the edges. She tied it around Marla's wrist, hands shaking, lips trembling with words she couldn't speak. Marla nodded, then stood. She opened the attic door for the last time. The air beyond was cold and red, lit not by moonlight, but by the glow from the orchard. The whole ceiling had gone transparent, like glass, and through it, she saw the orchard blooming. Every tree now cracked open at the center, revealing glistening hollows filled with teeth and petals and faces. Faces she knew. Elias, her grandmother, her father, each one singing, and in the center of them all, beneath the archway, Maeve, rooted into the ground, arms stretched wide, her torso fused with the earth, but her eyes sharp, aware, glowing with that same red hum. Marla stepped into the light. The pendant around her neck glowed. The shard in her hand pulsed. And the orchard, her orchard, went quiet. For the first time in decades, there was no sound. No whisper, no chime, just the air, just breath. And then Maeve opened her mouth and said, "You buried me in the fire. Now I'll burn my way out." The orchard screamed, and all the mirrors shattered at once. The scream was not human. It didn't enter through Marla's ears. It ruptured behind her eyes, forcing her teeth to clench and her knees to buckle. The entire orchard exhaled at once, not with wind or breath, but with voices. Voices no longer contained. The glass trees glowed from within, each one pulsating like a lung. From every trunk, every frost-coated limb, came the same sound. Marla, not shouted, sung, in layered harmonies, higher than birdsong, lower than thunder. And beneath it all, something ancient kept time. Not with a drum, but with the pulse of guilt. Marla dropped to her hands and knees on the attic floor, the shard of obsidian biting into her palm. Blood pooled in her hand and dripped onto the floorboards where it steamed against the frost. The orchard's voice burrowed deeper. She clutched her skull, her thoughts spinning in multiple voices, some hers, some Maeve's, some too old to name. You wore my silence like skin. You let them forget me. You closed your mouth when I opened mine. She crawled to the broken mirror propped against the far wall. The attic window behind it had shattered, letting in frost-glittered moonlight. Her reflection flickered. Not just her now, but versions of her. Marla as a child, staring at the burned door of the attic. Marla at the fire, mouth shut, eyes wide. Marla in the orchard, hand in Maeve's, right before she let go, and behind each of them, always, Maeve, still there, still watching, still waiting. Marla screamed, truly screamed, for the first time since she was 8. The sound didn't echo. It was absorbed. The glass pendant at her throat flashed white hot. The obsidian shard pulsed, and outside, the orchard changed key, its song reversed. The same melody, but backward, as if unspooling something, undoing it. She stumbled to the window. The archway of trees at the center of the grove had fully formed. It glowed with an interior light like a womb. Red, warm, pulsing. Inside it stood Maeve, rooted, her lower half fused into the earth, bark wrapping her spine, her ribcage exposed beneath glass. The red ribbon Caris had given Marla now tied around, her wrist fluttering in wind that did not exist. But Maeve was smiling. She opened her mouth. Inside was a voice-shaped flame. "Come, give me what you took," she sang, and the orchard sang with her. Marla ran, down the attic stairs, down the main hallway, past the shattered mirrors that now refused to reflect anything but her guilt. The house moaned. Glass fractured underfoot. Doors opened by themselves, leading her exactly where the orchard wanted her to go. As she neared the front door, she passed the dining room. She stopped. Caris was standing at the far end, frozen, arms limp at her sides. She was staring at something. A figure seated at the head of the long table. Grandmother, or what looked like her. Her skin was bark, her hair frost. Her jaw hung slack, and her eyes were pinwheels of mirrored surfaces. She did not blink. The voice that came from her wasn't spoken. It was sung, filtered through her chest like an organ pipe. I did it to protect you. I sealed the scream in wood. I gave her name to the frost. It grew better than I thought it would. Marla moved between them and grabbed Caris's wrist. But Caris didn't move. She was listening, and now her mouth moved, in song. One for the scream, one for the root. Give her the name, give her the fruit. No, Marla said. Not you too. But Caris turned to her, tears streaking frozen down her cheeks. Then whispered, barely audible. She's already taken it, my silence, my shape, my sound, and then she shattered right there. Caris's body cracked from the inside, her chest glowing, and then, with one final exhale, her body collapsed into a pile of red leaves and glass splinters. The silence that followed was not empty, it was expectant. Behind Marla, the manor whispered with dozens of voices, old and new, child and adult, all of them singing the same unfinished song. She stumbled out the front door into the orchard, the song pulling her now, dragging her across frost-slicked grass. She passed. The trees, they watched her with open mouths. Some bore fruit, some bore faces. Elias, her father, Caris, all of them singing. The archway loomed ahead, no longer just a tunnel of trees, but a fully formed throat. Its branches curled like vocal cords, and its walls pulsed with breath. She entered, and time fell apart. The orchard's heart was not a place. It was a memory made flesh. Inside, the trees gave way to mirrors, floating panes of memory. And in everyone, Marla and Maeve, one always reaching, one always turning away. Maeve stood at the center. Her body was no longer human. She was part root, part memory, part song. A child born of silence. She opened her arms. The ground beneath Marla cracked, and then, from beneath the soil, a chorus of hands reached up, hundreds of them. Pale, wet, grasping, each one attached to a voice that had once been silenced. The silent choir. One voice to seal, one scream to bloom. Give her the silence, or make her your tomb. Maeve stepped forward. The shard in Marla's palm glowed. The pendant blazed, and Marla understood. The orchard didn't need her voice. It needed her choice. She could give back the memory. Let Maeve take the name. Let her become Marla. Or she could keep it and cut the root. But to do that, she would have to remember everything, every choice, every scream not given, every moment she let Maeve face the fire, alone. Maeve reached out, glass fingers inches from her face. "Sister," she whispered, "let me bloom." Maeve's hand hovered before Marla's face, not quite touching, but too close to ignore. The fingers were made of something between frosted glass and old bone, flickering with pale blue light, pulsing with stored sound. Each fingertip bore a tiny embedded tooth, like rings of memory turned into ornament. And her voice, when she spoke again, was no longer just hers. It was everyone's. You ran once, but you brought the silence with you. You wore it like a ribbon. And now, you have to untie it. The air inside the orchard's throat-shaped heart thickened. Breathing was like swallowing wax. Marla took one step back. Maeve followed. The mirrored panes hovering around them, memories caught in glass, began to twist. No longer snapshots. Now, replays. In one pane, young Maeve cried, clutching the pendant, begging her sister not to leave. In another, Marla watched the fire climb the attic stairs, frozen in place. In a third, their grandmother sat at the frost tree with a knife, whispering, "One for the flame, one for the name." But it was the fourth mirror that broke her. It showed Marla after the fire, alone, clean, voice stolen, sitting in a hospital bed while a social worker gently said, "Your sister is gone, but you're safe now." Marla's lips moved, but no sound came, and the pendant, still warm from the orchard, glowed faintly under her gown. She had buried Maeve, with silence, with forgetting. Maeve stepped closer. Her mouth opened again. Too wide now, the skin at the corners cracking like thawing bark. Inside, Marla could see the glass scream she had once buried. It was still whole, still intact. "Cut it," Maeve whispered, "or give it to me." Marla looked down at the obsidian shard, still wrapped in blood-soaked cloth in her fist. She remembered what Elias said. "You don't stop a root. You pull it out. Or let it take you." Her hand trembled. The two pendants at her neck, hers and Maeve's, began to chime together, disharmonious, clashing. She lifted the blade. Maeve raised her hand, touched the tip with one finger. Her skin hissed, cracked, but she didn't pull away. "You want to remember?" she asked softly. "Then bleed it." Marla nodded once and drove the shard into her own chest. The sound that followed was not a scream. It was a note, a perfect high E, ringing out from her ribs, blasting through the orchard like a bell tolling in a church made of lungs. The mirrored. Panes shattered. The ground trembled. The trees recoiled. Marla dropped to her knees, blood pouring from the wound, not red but clear, tinged with gold. The obsidian shard hissed in the wound, vibrating like it was feeding. The memory returned all at once. The fire, Maeve's cry, the chant, the knife, the fact that Marla had said the final line, not Maeve, that she'd offered Maeve's voice, not her own, because their grandmother had told her that only one could be the root. "You were always quieter," she had said. "You'll survive the silence better." And so Marla had said the rhyme, surrendered her sister, watched the orchard bloom, watched the flame take her. Maeve hadn't volunteered, she'd been given. The weight of it dropped Marla flat against the soil. But then, a sound, the sound of the orchard breaking, not snapping, cracking, above. The trees shuddered. The branches flared with white fire. The fruit dropped and burst into dust, and Maeve, still glowing, still open, screamed. Not in pain, in release. The voice that had been Marla's came pouring from her mouth like a tide. Notes, vowels, syllables, all the things that had never been said. And Marla, on her knees, bleeding glass blood into the orchard floor, looked up and whispered, just once, "I remember." Maeve froze, then smiled and said, "Then it's yours again." She collapsed. Not into death, but into petals. Red glass petals, each one bearing a name. They scattered across the orchard as the trees turned to ash. The sky above cracked. The chimes fell. And for the first time since she was 8 years old, Marla screamed, a full, guttural, perfect scream, and the orchard finally listened. The scream did not echo. It was not swallowed. It was received, as if the very soil had ears, as if the orchard, for all its cruelty, had only ever wanted this, a confession born in breath. Marla's scream ripped through the red-tinted silence of Wither Orchard like the shattering of an oath, peeling back layers of frost, soundless years and ritual lies. Her mouth burned, throat raw, but she didn't stop. Because it was not just her scream, it was Maeve's, and Caris's, and Elias's, and every voice that had been offered, stolen, buried in roots, and sealed behind bark. The glass-barked trees began to crack from within, not explode, fracture. Slowly, methodically, as if each was crumbling from the inside out, no longer able to hold the screams they had digested. From their trunks poured rivulets of viscous sap, laced with sound. Marla could hear words inside it, snatches of old songs, whispers of forgotten names, screams once stifled by ritual and ash. And then, in the deepest tremor of the orchard's breathing silence, something shifted in her chest. At first, she thought it was adrenaline, but then she felt it again, a movement not her own. She looked down and realized the pendant had melted. Its fused form had vanished during her scream, dissolving into her skin like sugar into water. No object, no relic. It had become part of her. Beneath her collarbone, her chest pulsed faintly with light. A red glow beneath the skin, threading across her sternum in branching lines. A root, small, but moving, alive. Her scream had given the orchard what it wanted, and now it wanted to stay. She staggered backward into the remnants of the archway, glass and bone crunching underfoot, the obsidian shard slick with gold-tinged blood still clutched in her hand. The mirror memories around her had gone dark. The orchard's song had ceased. The silence that followed was honest, not a cage, but a breath. But then she heard it, a slow, low rumble, like something deep beneath the ground was stirring for the first time in centuries. Marla turned. Behind the remains of the orchard's altar stood the oldest tree, blackened, towering, untouched by her scream. At its base, a hollow mouth in the roots, wide enough to crawl through. From it came steam, and voices, and something else. A feeling, familiarity. She stepped forward, breath hitching. The ground vibrated with each movement, as if it were recognizing her, or claiming her. When she reached the opening, the air turned sweet. Sickly sweet. Inside the hollow, stairs, carved not by hands, but worn by use. Generations of use, she descended. Below the orchard, beneath the frost-veined soil and centuries of buried sound, was a chamber carved in silence. She could not tell if it had been shaped by people, or if it had formed organically. The walls were smooth, almost slick, glowing faintly with bioluminescent script that pulsed as she approached. Letters she could not read, but which her body understood. It wasn't a tomb. It was a womb. At the chamber's center grew a root cluster rising from a pool of golden sap. The roots writhed, slowly, like anemones. At the top of the root cluster was something wrapped in bark, covered in tangled hair and ribbons of cloth. Maeve, or what remained. She was not dead, but neither was she fully alive. Her eyes opened as Marla approached, white, sightless. Her mouth was open but not breathing, just waiting. Above her chest pulsed a shard of light, embedded directly in her sternum. A fragment of the pendant never recovered. Marla reached for it instinctively and felt her own heartbeat stop. Not for a second, for 10 full seconds. A dead pause. Her lungs moved, but no air came. She stumbled back. Her skin, beneath the collarbone, moved again. The root, it was growing faster, curling through her like wire. She collapsed, convulsing. Visions erupted behind her eyes. Her grandmother standing before the root, whispering. One voice, one name. Her father slicing open his palm, pressing it to the soil. Elias burying the blade and telling it, sleep, but remember. Karis handing her the ribbon and mouthing, don't speak until it's true. And then a voice, inside her, not her own, not Maeve's, deeper, older. The one who screams last becomes root. The one who is remembered becomes name. You have screamed, Marla. You will now be the memory. She will be the voice. No, Marla gasped aloud. She crawled to Maeve's body, raised the obsidian shard again. I choose her. She sliced into her own chest. Deep, a final offering. The root beneath her skin recoiled, squealing like something wounded. A spurt of gold glass sap sprayed from her wound, and for one agonizing moment, her vision went white. When she looked up, Maeve's eyes had changed. Color had returned. The shard in her chest dimmed, and Marla saw her own, face reflected in it, not just her features, her voice, her pain, her silence. She had transferred it. Marla fell backward, breath shallow, and from the pool of sap came a voice, new, unsteady, but real. Marla. Maeve was waking, but Marla was fading. She looked at her hand. The lines of red beneath her skin had turned black. The root was dying, but not before taking something with it. The first thing Marla lost was her own voice, not the ability to speak. That had been stolen long ago. No, this was different. It was the recognition of her voice, the memory of how it once sounded. Even in her own thoughts, the inner monologue, she'd lived with her entire life now unspooled into blank tape. A hollow hiss replaced the sound of her. She clutched her chest. The cut she'd made across her collarbone still burned. The obsidian shard lay discarded in the dirt behind her, steaming with a faint amber residue, a mingling of her blood and Maeve's scream, now unbound. The root beneath her skin had recoiled, but not died. Instead, it had gone dormant. It no longer pulsed, it no longer hummed. It had simply become part of her, like an organ, like an inheritance, and across from her, in the center of the orchard's hidden, honey-lit chamber, Maeve stirred. She sat up slowly, every movement wet, with the sound of separating from the root cluster that had kept her warm for decades. The sap clung to her skin like silk spun from ash. Her eyes fluttered open, no longer white and blind. They were brown again. They were hers. She coughed, and this time the air came out as breath, not chime. Marla reached toward her, crawling across the resin-slicked floor. Maeve blinked, dazed. "It over," she whispered. Marla nodded, once. She tried to speak, but only a breath came, no sound. Maeve looked at her with a haunted familiarity. "Marla," she said. Then more urgently, "Marla, what did you do?" Marla touched her chest, where the red ribbon still tied around her wrist. She turned it outward. The knot was sealed in black sap. Maeve's voice cracked. "You gave me the name," she whispered. "You finished the chant. You finished it for real." She looked down at her own hands, turning them over. She flexed her fingers, opened her mouth, sang a single quiet note. It echoed perfectly through the chamber. She had her voice back, and Marla, the last one to scream, had become the root, the price of the ritual. The namekeeper. Maeve reached for her, but Marla recoiled, weak. Behind her, the root cluster began to tighten, not retreating, but reforming. In the pool of gold sap, something stirred. Another shape, not fully formed, but becoming. A body. A body made of sap and silence, slowly rising from the pool like it had been waiting beneath her all along. It looked like Marla, but wasn't. Its eyes were voids. Its mouth was sealed shut with dark stitching. It stood, dripping with memory, and turned to face the girls. Maeve pulled Marla backward. "It made a copy," she said. "You screamed, and now it's preserving the scream. In you, the doppelganger." Stepped forward, arms loose at its sides. Behind its lips, muffled and wet, came a voice. "One name for another." One sister remembered. One sister erased. Maeve gritted her teeth. "No." She turned to Marla. "We have to seal it." Marla tried to shake her head, but Maeve grabbed her hands. "You gave me your name, your sound. That was the cut, but we can still close the wound." She held up her wrist. The ribbon, red, frayed, burned at one end, shimmered faintly in the saplight. "If we bind the wound," she whispered, "we trap the root in us, not in the orchard." Marla frowned. Confused, Maeve squeezed her hand. "You took the silence to save me." "Now I take the voice to protect you." Then she tied the ribbon around both of their wrists, binding them together. Immediately, the root doppelganger shrieked, not in sound, but in mirror shatter, a concussive blast of memory that made the resin cave flicker with past versions of the sisters, climbing the frost tree when they were 6, sneaking matches under the floorboards, the night of the fire. The moment Marla said the last line of the chant, sealing Maeve's fate, Maeve stood, faced the doppelganger. "You were never her," she said. "You were the sound of her guilt. That's all." The creature lunged, but Marla stepped in front of her, even without breath, even without voice, and opened her mouth. The pendant under her skin blazed red, and every tree above ground screamed in unison. The sound pierced the cave. The doppelganger staggered, howled, cracked. Lines split across its limbs like overripe fruit. It tried to speak again, but Marla grabbed the obsidian shard from the ground, gripped Maeve's hand tighter with the other, and plunged the blade into its chest. Not to kill, to seal. The scream was sucked inward. The sap receded. The body turned to glass, then to smoke, then to silence. Real silence, the kind you earn. The chamber dimmed, The root collapsed, and both sisters fell. They lay side by side in the fading light. Hands still bound together, the red ribbon soaked in resin. Maeve turned to her. "Do you know what they'll call us?" she whispered. Marla shook her head. Maeve smiled sadly. One sister who screamed, and one who listened. Marla finally mouthed, "Thank you." Maeve pressed her forehead to hers, and for the first time since the ritual, they were twins again. They lay in silence for a long time. Marla and Maeve, twin silhouettes side by side, wrists bound by the red ribbon that had once sealed a curse, now sealing something else. A choice, a bond, a scream given, and a voice reclaimed. Above them, the root chamber sighed as if it too were tired. The golden sap had stopped rippling. The walls pulsed slower. The bioluminescent symbols carved into the stone faded one by one until they glowed only faintly, no longer alive with memory, but resting. Marla's body ached from the wound across her chest, the obsidian cut that had separated her from the orchard's hunger. But beneath the pain was something unfamiliar, stillness, not numbness, not the ringing hush of trauma, a silence that felt earned. Maeve rolled onto her side, propped herself on one elbow. "You should sleep," she whispered. Her voice, though her own, still echoed faintly with undertones of the orchard, like her vocal cords had been tuned by frost. Marla shook her head, mouth parting in a quiet breath. There was something behind her eyes now, not just memory. Resolve. They both heard it at the same time, the sound of something shifting overhead, wood groaning, glass grinding, a tremor in the canopy. Maeve sat up. "The orchard's changing," she said. Again. Marla pulled herself up beside her and looked to the low tunnel that led back up to the surface. A dull red glow now bled through the seams. Of the roots, not like fire, like a wound reopening. Maeve pressed a hand to the wall. It shivered beneath her fingers. Something's wrong. Then from behind them, the sap pool bubbled. Just once, like breath in water. The surface didn't break, but Marla felt the sound in her teeth. Not over. Not yet. Something remains. When they emerged from the tunnel, the orchard had changed again. The trees were no longer singing. They were speaking. Each one, every branch, every limb, moved in small, precise gestures, their leaves, whispering syllables in languages neither of them remembered learning. The chimes no longer clinked randomly. Now they swung in time, with some invisible rhythm, spelling out a rhythm in code. Maeve stopped beneath the first arch. It's remembering. Marla looked at her. Us. Maeve shook her head. Everything. The orchard was rerouting itself, but not into the land, into time. As they moved deeper into the grove, the paths twisted in ways that defied logic. Trees they'd passed minutes ago stood ahead of them again. Roots curled like fingers around old objects that hadn't been there before: a child's shoe, a rusted cassette, a severed braid tied with silk. One of the trees exhaled, and its bark split down the center. Inside, pressed between layers of glass-like growth, was a preserved photograph. Maeve pulled it out gently. It showed their mother, young, holding two babies, one laughing, the other with its mouth open in a silent cry, scrawled on the back in a child's handwriting. One for breath, one for root. Marla traced the picture with her thumb, then looked up. More trees had begun opening, revealing offerings. The flute her father once played in secret after the fire. Her grandmother's ritual journal, bound in teeth. The broken pendant, somehow whole again, pulsing faintly, but trapped in amber. Maeve stepped forward. Her voice was barely audible. "It's giving everything back." Marla furrowed her brow. But why? From the center of the orchard, beneath the archway's last remnant, a shape moved. Not Maeve's double, not her own. Someone else. Caris, or what had become of her. She was not glass, not bark, but a vessel, her skin translucent, her eyes completely black. Inside her chest, faint shadows fluttered like wings made of breath. She looked at them with no expression, then spoke, in a voice that belonged to many. You severed the bond. You took back the name. But the orchard still holds the root. Maeve stepped forward. We cut it. No, Caris said. You cut one. She raised her hand. The trees bent in response, roots lifted like limbs, and at the heart of the orchard, something rose from the soil. Not a tree, not a person, a throat, massive, cracked, pulsing, formed of roots, ribbons, and 1,000 buried voices, all stitched together in the shape of a gaping mouth. Maeve gasped. That's the original. Caris nodded. The first voice, buried by the ones who built this place. Before your family, before the Hollow. She turned to Marla. You've quieted it, but it was never meant to be silenced, only fed. The throat groaned. From within, a wet rattling began to rise, like a million suppressed sobs preparing to force themselves upward. The chimes began to tremble again, this time not in song, in warning. Maeve backed away. What happens if it speaks? Caris answered with a single line. It replaces every name it hears. A chill coursed down Marla's spine. They were still bound by the ribbon, still linked. If the first voice spoke, it could rewrite who they were. Maeve turned to her, eyes wild. We have to bury it, not silence it. Bury it. Marla stared at the obsidian shard still in her hand, now dull and cracked. Not enough. Not anymore. She looked at the ribbon, and she knew. One scream had started this. One ribbon had bound it. One sacrifice would end it. She turned to Maeve. Tears welled in her eyes. Maeve instantly understood. No. Marla reached for her face, touched her cheek gently, shook her head. Yes. Maeve gripped her hand. You brought me back, so you could go forward. Marla didn't say it aloud. She couldn't, but Maeve heard it. Then, gently, Marla untied the ribbon, and the orchard howled. The moment the ribbon unraveled, the orchard screamed, not in anger, in recognition. A scream not meant to be heard by ears, but by roots, by memory, by the soil that had stored too many voices too long. The red silk fell from Marla and Maeve's wrists like a snapped blood vessel, and the moment it hit the frost-slicked earth, the trees bent backward, all of them, as if retreating from what was coming. The air trembled. The sky warped, and the first voice began to rise. From the orchard's center, beneath the archway's dying light, the massive throat unfurled itself, like a flower made of flesh, glass, and ancestral ash. It grew taller than the trees. Its surface was slick with root veins and looped vocal cords, each one etched with names, hundreds of them, stretching and stretching until the skin no longer looked like bark or muscle, but writing. M-A-R-L-A, M-A-E-V-E, C-A-R-Y-S, E-L-I-S. The names repeated in a circle, then reversed, then blurred, then began to vanish one by one. Marla stumbled back, clutching her chest. The place where the pendant had once glowed beneath her skin was now burning, but not with light, with forgetting. She turned to Maeve, but Maeve was already looking through her, not with panic, but grief. You're fading, she whispered. Marla tried to speak. No words, just breath, even her internal voice. The one that had survived the hospital, the fire, the ritual, was dimming. The first voice opened wider. The mouth, now the size of the manor itself, pulsed with wet, guttural sound. A name is not a truth, it rumbled. It is a root, planted, watered with silence. From within its throat emerged a wind so dense it wasn't wind at all. It was exhaled time. Marla watched as it passed over the trees, and with each gust, a little more of the orchard unhappened. The frost melted. The chimes fell in pieces. The glass trees turned dull, bark splitting to reveal bones beneath, and the sky above them tore, revealing nothing. No stars, no moon, just a waiting. Blank. Maeve grabbed Marla's hand. "We can't run. We can't cut it." Marla nodded. And then, a voice behind them. "You can replace it." They turned. Caris, but not quite. What remained of her now stood half shadow, half witness. Her eyes empty sockets filled with swirling phonemes. Her mouth, an aperture through which other voices whispered. She held the broken obsidian shard, and with her other hand pointed toward Marla. "You gave your name once," she rasped. "Now give the scream, not the memory, the sound." Maeve shook her. "Ed." "No, it'll rewrite her." Caris tilted her head. "Only if she's afraid of who she'll become." The orchard began to unravel. The first voice groaned again, louder now, harmonized by the echoes of every scream ever offered to it. The air thickened. Trees bled sap. Marla felt her fingers beginning to blur. The scream was already working, pulling her from time, from identity. Her name was slipping. She turned to Maeve. In her eyes, clarity, acceptance. And then she mouthed the only word that mattered.
"Now!" Maeve screamed, not in fear, but in invitation. She reached forward, grabbed Marla's hand, and sang into her, not a song of sorrow, a song of remembrance. Marla inhaled deep, and then she screamed, not with her voice, with everyone's Elias.
Caris, grandmother, Jonah, Maeve, even the orchard. The scream shattered the name etched in her bones and replaced it with sound so pure it could not be eaten, rewritten, or buried. The first voice faltered. The great throat lurched. The names spinning across its flesh stopped vanishing. They began to burn. One by one, they caught fire, letters curling into embers. The first voice tried to close, but couldn't, because Marla was no longer a name. She was the scream itself. The orchard caught flame. The glass trees shrieked. The fruit burst, roots unspooled like unraveling intestines, and the sky, the blank sky above them, it screamed too. Not in horror, in completion. The ritual didn't end. It fulfilled. When it was over, the orchard was gone. The trees were gone. The frost, the roots, the screams, the mirrors, all gone. Just a quiet, fog-drenched meadow remained, and in the middle of it stood Maeve, alone. Her wrist still marked where the ribbon had been tied, now scarred with the outline of a name that no longer burned. She turned in a slow circle. No sound, no song, just birds overhead. A trickle of wind. She pressed her hand to her chest. There was no pendant, but she felt it. The voice was hers, and her sister's silence was no longer a prison. It was a gift. Then, from the fog, a wind blew, and with it, a sound. Just one word. Maeve. She turned and smiled. Still here? Brave. Or maybe you just like the feeling of being watched. Like, subscribe, and drop your time and location in the comments, so we know who's still out there. Now breathe slow. The worst is coming. Maeve's lone figure in the mist felt impossibly small, yet impossibly vast, as if the orchard's entire hunger now resided in her slender frame. Marla watched through the thinning fog, her chest hollow where the scream had once lived. No, words passed between them. The quiet was their new language. Slowly, Maeve turned and beckoned. Marla stepped forward, boots crunching on dew-slick grass. Every step felt like passing through a dream. Her limbs weighted with memory, her mind buoyed by the echo of that final, purifying scream. They reached the edge of the meadow, and there, Half buried in bracken and broken brambles stood the manor. Its silhouette was warped, as if seen through rippling water. The windows yawned empty. The roof sagged beneath the weight of centuries. Yet vines, glass-veined and delicate, still clung to the cracked stone, pulsing faintly with residual sap. Maeve glanced at Marla. In her eyes, an unspoken question. Marla nodded, steeling herself. They pressed open the front door together. It swung inward on ancient hinges, with a keening groan that resonated in their bones. The corridor stretched before them, long and narrow, illuminated by shards of pale dawn seeping between broken shutters. The floor sagged. In places it had caved, revealing the cellar's yawning shadow below. A soft crack echoed at their feet. Marla started and looked down, a single floorboard splitting lengthwise, a hairline fracture that crept outward like a spider's web. She pointed. Maeve followed her gaze, lips parting in a silent "oh." Above them, the ceiling planks trembled. Tiny glass beads like dew rained down, tinkling against broken tiles. When the last droplet fell, the house fell silent. In that hush, Marla heard it. A heartbeat. Not her own, not Maeve's. Louder, slower, as if the manor itself drew breath. They exchanged a scared glance, then moved forward. They entered the parlor where the fireplace gaped like an empty mouth. A grand mirror above the hearth lay shattered across the floor, every shard reflecting something different. One showed Marla as a child, another Maeve at the edge of the orchard, a third, an unknown girl, face peering out from behind glass shards. Marla approached and picked up a shard. She saw her own eye, wide with wonder. In its reflection, a new shape. At the far end of the room, the old piano, long silent, had its keys pressed down, as though invisible fingers played a lament. Maeve moved to the piano. She laid a single hand on the ivory keys. They rang out, not with melody, but with whispers, a cascade of half-heard phrases. You returned. You remembered. Now finish it. Marla felt her throat tighten. She set the shard down, then heard a groan from the walls. The plaster cracked, along the molding, revealing a fissure. Inside, the wood was striated with glass veins. A hand-shaped root burst free, scrabbling like a finger toward the floor. Elias's voice echoed from memory. The house remembers too. Marla swallowed her fear. Maeve, she whispered. Maeve's hand trembled on the keys. The whispers stopped. In the sudden silence, Marla realized the keys were clicking on their own, driven by an unseen will. Suddenly, the wall behind the piano warred open, a jagged fissure splitting the room. From it poured dust and motes of glowing sap, swirling like fireflies. Through the crack, Marla glimpsed the orchard's heart, now a distant pulsing glow beneath the roots that tunneled under the house. Maeve stepped back, stepping on a broken key that jangled discordantly. The crack widened to a full doorway, the room filled with a low hum, the manor's lament, as if it was singing its own requiem. Marla placed her hand on Maeve's shoulder. We go through, she mouthed. Maeve nodded, steeling herself. Together they crossed the threshold. The world tilted. The floor pitched downward, carrying them forward as if walking on a shifting wave. The air grew sticky with sap scent. The walls closed in, lined with root veins, pulsing with pale light. The hum rose to a crescendo, and with a final, shuddering crack, the house surrendered. They fell through the fissure into darkness, landing on soft earth. They were beneath the parlor, in a chamber of roots and shattered glass. The manor's heartbeat pulsed around them, a living vessel of memory. Maeve clutched Marla's hand, eyes bright with both dread and determination. Above, through the breach they'd created, They could see the parlor floor far above, pale light streaming down. Marla drew a slow breath and looked at Maeve. "This is where it ends," she said, and though her voice felt small, Maeve heard her. Together, they stood, and the roots parted before them, opening a path into the heart of the house's own buried memory. The roots moved as if they were breathing. Each step Marla and Maeve took deeper into the wound beneath the manor was echoed by the soft shifting of tendrils parting around them, clearing a path as though they were expected. The walls were lined with thousands of thread-thin glass veins, each one lit from within by pulses of red-gold light that dimmed and brightened in rhythm with their footsteps. They had entered the memory of the house, a space carved not by tools or time, but by remembrance, a secret interstitial hollow where all the family's sins had pooled, where all the lost voices the orchard hadn't consumed were stored. And at its center waited the hearth, not the fireplace they knew from the parlor, above but something older, deeper, a black stone circle sunken into the earth. From its center rose a spine made of stacked names, engraved bone fragments layered like vertebrae. The air smelled like burnt sugar and old breath. Marla stopped just shy of the circle's edge. Maeve stood beside her, trembling. "This is the root of it," she whispered. "Not the orchard, not the mirror. This is where she burned it." "Grandmother," Marla said softly, the word fragile in the space. Maeve nodded. "The real ritual. The one before us. The one she never finished. All. Around them the roots curled upward like antennae. Some bore eyes. Others had small mouths, softly mouthing sounds with no voice. It was not malevolent, but it was aware. Marla stepped into the circle. Instantly the temperature dropped. Her breath crystallized in the air. She knelt at the hearth and ran her fingers across the engraved names on the bones. Elias Caris Maeve Marla. M. The last name was unfinished. The final letter had been scratched, never completed. Marla traced it. Her fingertip lit up with a sudden, sharp heat. Not painful, but searing like memory. The bones vibrated, and then the fire returned, not as flame, as vision. All at once the room was flooded with light, and the past rose like smoke. They stood again in the attic, but it was decades ago. Their grandmother knelt in a chalk circle, her hands slick with blood, her voice chanting low and fast. One for the voice, one for the name. Burn what binds, let root reclaim. Young Marla and Maeve stood at opposite ends of the circle, the pendant hung between them, suspended by a thread of red ribbon. Their faces were pale, expectant. But as the chant reached its final line, their grandmother hesitated. She looked up, directly at the spectre of present-day Marla watching, and spoke to her. "I couldn't choose, so I let the fire do it." The vision snapped. The bones cracked in the hearth, the roots recoiled, then surged forward, wrapping the chamber's perimeter in a tight spiral. From the earth, a pillar rose, dark and veined, and atop it, a glass locket shaped like a human larynx inside which glowed a single ember. Maeve gasped. That's her memory. Marla stepped forward. Each pulse of light from the locket sent tremors through the walls, whispers, shouts, sobs. It was the grandmother's voice, not preserved in sound, but in the choice she never made. And now Marla understood. The ritual had always required an offering. The orchard took Maeve. The house in turn demanded someone else. The balance had been broken. Maeve turned to her, eyes wide. If we take it back, we'll finish what she couldn't. Marla nodded slowly. One name, one voice, chosen, not stolen. She reached for the locket. The chamber screamed. The earth convulsed. The walls cracked. Every root in the room lunged inward, desperate to stop her, not out of hatred, but desperation, as if the entire legacy of their family clung to its imbalance like a leech. But Marla did not flinch. She gripped the locket, and the light inside it exploded. The chamber was replaced. Suddenly, they were no longer underground. They were outside, beneath a dusk sky, in the orchard. But before the glass trees, before the frost, before the silence. The trees were just saplings. The chimes had not yet been hung. The soil was rich and wet and unsung. A woman stood ahead of them, their grandmother, young, unwrinkled, fierce. In her arms she held a baby, swaddled in red cloth. Another baby lay in a bassinet nearby, wrapped in white. Two girls, one awake, eyes open, the other sleeping. Their grandmother looked between them, tears in her eyes. "I don't know which one will be stronger," she said aloud. Then she turned to the tree and whispered, "Choose for me." The roots wrapped around the red-swaddled child. "Maeve!" she screamed, and the orchard was born. The vision cracked. The chamber returned. The roots recoiled. Marla opened her hand. The locket had shattered, but in its place glowed a single perfect tooth. A baby tooth. The first one Maeve had lost, the one their grandmother had buried. Marla placed it on the hearth's bones. Immediately, the room filled with smoke. But not choking, not fire. Release. The memory had been buried. Now it was remembered, and all at once, the manor above them creaked, cracked, and sighed, ready to let go. The house above them groaned like something ancient, exhaling its final breath. The creak echoed down into the memory chamber, reverberating through the roots and splintered beams. Dust fell from the ceiling like old ash shaken loose from a forgotten chimney. Marla and Maeve stood side by side, staring down at the tiny tooth resting on the cracked bones of the hearth. The glow had faded, but something had undeniably shifted, not just in the room, in the air. For the first time since the scream, there was no pressure behind their eyes, no vibration in the walls. The orchard's rhythm, that constant heartbeat of breath, guilt and grief, had gone quiet. Marla pressed a hand to her sternum. The root that had taken residence under her skin had stilled, completely. No pulse. No hunger, no sound. It was finally done. Above them, the wind began to change. A low moan through the broken window panes, not mournful, but tentative, as if the house itself were testing silence for the first time. Maeve turned to her. "Can you feel it?" Marla nodded. "It's letting go," Maeve said softly. "The orchard, the manor, her." They climbed from the chamber slowly, hand in hand, following the roots as they began to retract, curling inward into the cracked wood like spiders returning to their nests. Where once they'd snaked and pulsed and whispered, now they simply withdrew, the sound of hundreds of ancestral voices choosing rest. The foyer was filled with soft light when they emerged, the stained glass panels now faded to pale ivory. The staircase, once broken and twisted, had settled into a strangely perfect lean, not whole, but no longer angry. Caris's old recorder lay on the bottom step, intact but covered in a fine layer of frost dust. Maeve bent, pressed the play button. A single voice played, her own, but younger, clearer. "If you hear this, I remember. If you play this, I forgive you." The tape hissed, then ended. Marla stood frozen. Maeve turned slowly. "You made sure I'd remember, didn't you?" she whispered. Marla didn't respond. She didn't need to. Above them, the last of the chandelier's teeth chimes fell, one by one, with tiny crystalline tings, not mournful, but ceremonial. At the front of the house, the great doors, once warped shut by root and frost, stood open. Beyond them, the orchard, transformed. What had once been a snarling forest of glass and bark was now a field of dead trunks, their branches leafless, the chimes stilled, the ground thawing, and then the wind shifted again, the scent of earth, real, unburdened earth, no blood in the roots, no names in the bark, just dirt, just trees. Marla stepped forward into the orchard, barefoot now. The soil welcomed her with warmth, not chill. The trees did not lean or hum or whisper. They simply stood, mute, still, and healed. At the center of the grove, where the archway once rose, now sat a stone, unmarked, round, natural, a cairn. She approached, brushing away a layer of mist from its surface. Etched into the stone were 3 names: Maeve Evsend, Marla Evsend. The last scream, Maeve stepped beside her, reading the names aloud. "They remembered us," she said, "but they didn't own us." The orchard rustled. Just wind this time. Nothing else. A hush fell again. Not silence. Peace. The wind moved through the trees like breath in lungs that had been holding it too long. Later, back inside the manor, Maeve found her way into their grandmother's old bedroom. The mirror on the far wall was still intact, framed in a crooked circle of antler-like branches, the glass warped with age. She stood before it, and in the reflection, only herself. No past selves, no orchard shadows, just her. Marla appeared behind. Her, face glowing with the amber hue of the setting sun filtering through the broken windows. They stared at each other in the mirror, twin reflections at last. "What happens now?" Maeve asked. Marla picked up the old red ribbon from the table, tied it loosely around Maeve's wrist, then pressed the tape recorder into her hand. Maeve stared. Marla nodded toward the door. "You tell the story," she mouthed. Maeve blinked. "And you?" Marla smiled, a little sad, a little whole, and walked into the fading light. As she passed through the broken arch of the door, the wind caught her hair, and for a split second Maeve could hear it, the sound of her sister's voice, echoing, not in the trees but in the air itself, one last time. The orchard did not call her name, not anymore. It simply let her walk. Marla stepped beyond the threshold of the manor where the once glass forest now stood in mute reverence. The trees had been stripped of their hunger, their limbs no longer curled inward like clenched fists, but reached skyward, open-palmed and dry. No teeth, no chimes, no frost. Only a gentle breeze combing through a canopy that no longer remembered how to sing. The scream, the one that had fed the roots, named the bones, birthed the orchard, had been released, and with it, so much else had been undone. Marla moved as if underwater, her chest sore where the root had once pulsed under her skin. Her heartbeat was quiet now, steady. Her name still echoed faintly inside her, but it no longer felt like a burden. She reached the center of the grove, where the cairnstone stood, low and round, cool in the afternoon shade. The 3 names carved into its surface shimmered slightly in the breeze. Maeve Evsend, Marla Evsend. The last scream, she knelt before it, ran her fingers across the engraving. The moment her skin touched the stone, a faint shimmer spread outward, and the wind dropped to stillness. The orchard inhaled. The roots below remembered her, but this time, they didn't reach for her. They waited. Inside her coat pocket, the last fragment of the pendant, no longer glowing, no longer warm, trembled. Not alive, but charged. Residual. She took it out and stared at it in her palm. A sliver of clear red glass etched with 2 perfectly symmetrical lines, one horizontal, one vertical. It resembled a cross or a wound, a final relic of the story they'd closed, but not erased. Behind her, the manor's front door swung shut, of its own accord. She didn't turn around. She knew what waited inside. Maeve, alive, whole, telling the story, rebuilding what their grandmother had broken, giving names to things that were once unspeakable. But Marla, she had reached the end of her voice, and now came the choice. A memory surfaced, not of the fire, or the chant, or the cellar, but of something before all of it. They were 6. She and Maeve sat beneath the frost tree with their backs pressed to its bark, making up names for the wind. Maeve had whispered, "What would you call me if I wasn't your sister?" And Marla had answered without hesitation, "I wouldn't call you anything. I'd just come find you." Marla smiled. That was still true. And now, she could give Maeve something she'd never had, a life without this story. She stood slowly, held the glass shard in both hands, and broke it. The sound was soft, final, like a seal closing, not snapping. She felt it as it happened, the last root detaching from her spine, curling like smoke, then vanishing into the earth. The orchard did not resist. It accepted, because this time it was a gift. Marla pressed a hand to her chest. There was no name there now, only a silence that belonged to her. She looked back once at the house, saw Maeve watching from the upper window. Their eyes met, and Marla nodded, then turned and walked into the trees. She crossed the orchard by instinct, not memory. The land had softened. The soil gave under her feet. The wind picked up behind her, brushing through the tall grass with gentle rhythm. Not voices, not whispers, just the sound of letting go. When she reached the boundary of the property, the rusted old gate half swallowed by vines, she paused, reached into her pocket, pulled out Karis's old recorder, still miraculously whole. The tape inside had rewound itself. She pressed record, raised it to her lips, and spoke. "If anyone finds this, know that I walked away, not because I forgot, but because I finally chose to remember without holding on." She clicked it off, left it on the gatepost, then stepped into the woods beyond the orchard. No path, no scream, no name, just Marla, a girl reborn from silence, and the last witness to a forest that had once eaten voices and in the end gave them back. Maeve stood alone in the attic of the manor, the final rays of dusk catching on the dust that hovered like ash in the air. The floor beneath her was warped but no longer bleeding. The mirror in front of her, long fractured and strange, had settled into a quiet, complete pain. It no longer whispered, it only reflected herself. Not a double, not a child, not a shadow. Just Maeve, reborn from bark and scream, voice finally her own. She turned the tape recorder over in her hands, Karis's final gift, then gently pressed play. "If anyone finds this, know that I walked away, not because I forgot, but because I finally chose to remember without holding on." Marla's voice, still whole, still warm, Maeve's lips parted, a smile, a sorrow, and then a sound above her. A soft, hollow clink, like a wine glass touched by a fingertip. The last chime, the one they'd missed. She looked up. The wind had stirred one final tooth chime hanging crookedly from the roof beam, half forgotten. It swung gently in the breeze, catching the dying light, casting tiny crescents of red across the attic walls. Maeve stepped forward, untied it, held it in her hand. It was different from the others. This one was smooth, unetched, unclaimed, not marked with names or pain. Blank. New. She knew what it meant. The orchard had saved one for her. Outside, the field that had once been a glass forest had already begun its slow return to earth. The trees, now bare skeletons of themselves, had bent to the wind, shed their final leaves, and become something else, memory without malice. Maeve stepped through them barefoot, her skirt trailing behind like a thread unraveling from the past. The moon above glowed warm, not cold, washing the orchard in silver. She passed the cairnstone, touched it briefly. Her name was still there, and Marla's, and the space between them. The last scream. She sat beside the stone and opened the tape. Recorder once more. A new tape had been inserted. She clicked record. Her voice was strong, clear, even musical now. This place was never cursed. It was heavy, with forgetting, with fear, with all the things we swallowed to keep from breaking. She paused, then continued. We made a garden of silence and called it family. We planted roots of shame and let them grow into mirrors, but it doesn't have to keep growing. Maeve looked out over the quiet orchard. We remembered, and it let go. And she walked away, not as an echo, but as herself. She clicked the recorder off and hung the final tooth chime from the cairn. It clinked softly, not haunting, not mournful, just a sound, a note, a presence. Later, as dawn crested the edge of the hollow, a light wind blew through the empty orchard. It touched every tree, every root, every stone, and as it passed over the cairn, the final chime rang once, and then faded into stillness. There were no voices, no warnings, no names etched into bark, just a quiet breeze, and somewhere, far beyond the trees, a young woman walking into the unknown, whole. She carried no pendant, no ribbon, no scream, only memory, and behind her, the orchard slept, not sealed, not erased, only quiet. As if, at long last, it had finally heard what it needed to hear.